Okay.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. This is a meeting of the Council's Neighbourhoods and Public Spaces Committee. It's a meeting of the Council which is being held remotely. The meeting is being recorded and streamed via the YouTube, where members of the public are able to watch the meeting. The recording will be available on the Council's website following the meeting. Please note that any comments posted on the chat feed of the Council's YouTube page during the recording of this meeting are not monitored by the Council. Right, thanks very much. Apologies for absence.
We've got Councillor Pat Reid here in place of Councillor Mariam Yacoub this evening.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Just as a double-hatted member of Essex, with a number of items, particularly around waste and I suppose arguably the electrical vehicle part should be part of my declaration of interest, non-pecuniary, of course.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Okay, item 3, minutes. Confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of January. If you can,
David, Pat had her hand up for that declaration.
I apologise, I didn't see Pat. Councillor Reid.
Yes, if I can declare an interest on the waste, because being an Essex County Councillor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of January. All those in favour, I'm going to ask, go round if you unmute yourselves. In favour of a true record. All those. Reid, I'll come to you first.
I wasn't there, so I can't really vote on it.
Abstention.
Yeah.
Councillor Blake.
Agree.
Councillor Ferguson.
In favour.
Councillor Buckley.
Agreed, they're accurate, Chairman.
Councillor Dadds.
Agreed.
And myself is in favour. Thank you very much. Item 4 is the Neighbourhood and Public Spaces Committee work programme. I would like to add a couple of items onto here, please, before we vote on the programme. One on the Langdon Community Centre, and also on the biodiversity plan update, that is to include the tree strategy. I think also, and someone will correct me if I'm wrong, I think we now need to bring forward to March the Clearaway planning application to Essex County Council for waste recycling plant in Pitsea for consultation for response, because now the application has been validated. The 10th of March may well be the last opportunity to give our response. Mr. Brace.
Yeah, that will be the appropriate time. The consultation is, I think it's open now. So yeah, by the 10th we'll be fine. Yep.
Thank you. Okay. So it's a question of all those in favour of the work programme, unless anybody wishes to add any items. Councillor Buckley.
I did indicate that I wish to speak on the work programme, Mr. Chairman.
Well, okay, I'll take Councillor Dadds first then. Yeah, Councillor Buckley's muted anyway, so I'll take Councillor Dadds.
I think he's talking still. Right, so do you want me to go?
Yes, please.
Councillor Harrison. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that we have the Director of Community and Environment here. It's to do with the work programme for the Langdon Community Centre.
No, Councillor Dadds, I'm going to stop you there, please. If you just mute yourself for a moment. We're not discussing the Langdon Community Centre tonight. This is the work programme of the committee to put into the committee for the next meeting for a report on the Langdon Community Centre. Yes, now, Councillor Dadds, I'm speaking. Please obey the rules. Just mute yourself while I'm speaking, please. Thank you very much.
But I was speaking, you interrupted.
No, Councillor Dadds, please. Thank you. This is the work programme. We're not debating the work programme. We add items if you wish. but we're not discussing the items tonight because they're on the work programme for the next committee meeting. Okay, that's
Mr.
quite
Chairman,
clear. So we'll now take the vote. Councillor Dadds.
Mr. Chairman, that's clear to me. Mr. Chairman, that is clear to me. I don't want this debated.
Please be quiet.
I don't want to debate
Otherwise,
it.
I will move that you no longer be heard.
Mr. Chairman,
Councillor Dadds.
I asked to talk to the work programme.
Councillor Dadds,
I want to
please
talk to
be
the work
quiet.
programme. I want to
Councillor
talk to the
Dadds.
work programme.
Councillor Dadds, please be quiet.
I want to talk to the work programme.
Please be quiet. As a former mayor, you should know better.
I do
It's
know,
about
and I know
time
I'm
you learn to
right
control
to be able
yourself.
to speak. Are you
Please,
silencing me?
Yes,
Are
I
you
am.
silencing me?
I am
want to speak
talking.
to this
I am
item.
talking.
I
when
want
I
to
can-
speak to this item. I want to speak to this item. Please
find
call
it
me
strange.
when you're ready.
Will you please be quiet? I find it strange you want to talk to this item on the work programme.
I do.
Because normally you vote against having a work programme. I'm surprised that you even want to talk any
Forget about
item.
that. I want to talk to it today, please.
Right. I'm now taking the vote on the work programme.
No, I want to talk to the work programme.
Councillor Ferguson.
I want to talk to the work
Thank you.
programme.
Councillor
I'm
Blake.
entitled to be called, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Blake.
We've got an item
Councillor
number
Blake.
4 on the
In
agenda.
favour.
I've indicated
Favour.
to speak, and I wish to
Councillor Reid.
speak. I've indicated I wish
favour.
to speak.
Thank you.
and I
I'm in
want to be
favour.
called.
Councillor Buckley.
I did indicate to speak on this item as well, Chairman, and
Well, are you in favour of the work programme or against it?
I'm against it as usual.
Okay. Councillor Dadds, in favour or against the work
No,
programme?
I want to speak to it. You can't silence the
not
residents
voting.
of Langdon. You
Councillor
can't
Dadds.
silence me. You must
I
not
have
silence
silenced
me.
you.
I
Please
want
be
to speak
quiet.
on it. I
I'm
want
not
to speak.
speaking on
When
it.
I asked the legal officer, the democratic support officer, to support me,
No,
duly backed. I
I'm-
want to speak to
I'm
this
taking
item.
the vote.
I
And
want
while
to
we're
speak to
voting,
this item.
you know,
It's a public
Councillor
record
Dadds,
that I've
Councillor
indicated
Dadds,
to speak. I
you
should be
well
able
know
to
the
speak to that
constitution
item,
of this
Mr. Chairman.
council.
Why
You
are
well
you
know the
silencing me?
constitution of this
Why are
council.
you not calling me?
Right.
What is it you want to hide? What is it
You're
you
not
don't want me
hiding
to
anything.
say?
It's on the
When are you
work programme
demolishing
for
the
the next
centre?
meeting.
I've heard
Please,
you want to demolish it. Is that why you want to silence me?
I'm not
Why do you
silencing.
not want to
I'm
call
asking
me?
to be quiet.
Why am I not allowed to speak? Please
No,
call
you're
me.
not. Thank you. Right. Are you in
Please call
favour of
me.
the work programme or not?
Please call me to
Are you in
speak on the
favour? I'm asking
item.
you. Are you
I
in
want
favour?
to speak to the item.
Right. Councillor Dad's not voting. It's carried.
No,
Thank
I
you
want
very
to
much.
speak to
We'll
the
now
item.
move on to
I'm
item 4.
entitled to speak to the item. Are you
Item 5, the
silencing me?
youth zone
Because I
update.
want to talk about a work on the work programme.
Councillor Dadds, we're on now item 5, the youth zone update. So
No,
please.
I want to speak to item 4. Can
We're
I
on
have
item
one of the
5,
officers,
Councillor
please?
Dadds.
Can I have one of the officers?
No,
set
no,
out
Councillor
the
Dadds,
part
I'm
of
chairing
the
this meeting.
Constitution
Please
that
be
allows me to
quiet.
speak?
Otherwise, I will move that you no
You
longer
can.
be heard.
I'm entitled to be speak.
No,
I've
okay.
indicated to
Yeah,
speak.
item 5.
Please call me on that item.
Item 5, youth
Can
zone
I
update.
please? This is a public record.
Item
I've asked to
5, we're
speak
doing
to
the youth
work
zone
programme.
update. I'm
I'm
looking
being
for Mr.
excluded
Taylor.
by Councillor
Mr.
Harrison
Taylor,
to
will you
speak
give
to
your
the work
report, please,
programme.
on the youth zone
That's
update?
something to hide, I'm sure. You.
Youth zone
Why won't
update.
he allow me to speak? Why am I being silenced? I'm entitled to speak. I'm a democratically
Councillor,
elected councillor.
Mr. Taylor's speaking now, so please be quiet, Councillor Dadds. Councillor Dadds, you are a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. You're an absolute disgrace, and for a former mayor to behave the way you're behaving tonight is a disgrace.
My right to
It's
speak.
an absolute
I want
disgrace.
to exercise my
You've
right to
exercised
speak.
your right and you haven't
I've
shut up. So
indicated
now please
I was
shut up
very
and behave
polite.
yourself.
I've indicated I
Councillor
have my
Ferguson.
right to speak. I want
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the residents of this borough want to hear about a youth zone that's going to bring benefits to our young people. So can we please move on to agenda item number 5 and hear the update on the youth zone?
We're on agenda item 5.
I've indicated to speak. Why
Will you
won't
mute
call
yourself,
me?
please? Will you mute yourself,
Why
please?
won't you
Thank
call
you.
me?
Mr. Taylor, will you continue, please?
Yes,
Thank you.
Councillor. Yes, Councillor. So, yeah, just wanted to give a quick update, a verbal update on the youth zone. A full update will be coming to the next committee. But I think there was a particular question this time for us to come back and discuss the funding that has been worked towards by on side over this period. So since the committee approved the project in November, the fundraising campaign is started and is going well. Immediately, since the project was approved, Onside recruited 2 fundraisers who I'm pleased to say started this month. One capital fundraiser is just over 2 weeks into his role, and the other will be focusing on revenue, and they started this week, so good progress there. As at this stage, they don't have any pledges or donations towards the Basildon Youth Zone, but Onside we're very clear that's not surprising, being only 2 weeks into the role. We're really pleased to say that we've got a very, very experienced Onside fundraiser working with us, Johnny, who in his last role received pledges for £800,000 per year revenue. So we're bringing that expertise into the Basildon Youth Zone, which I think is really which is really good news for the project being able to proceed. So that's £2.4 million over 3 years, of course. So for our latest youth zone, and this is for our latest youth zone to open, sorry. The new officer who started this week, I'm really pleased to say, is a Basildonian. He's someone that went to school in Basildon and has got extensive experience in raising this money for a very prominent local charity that I'm sure that many of us will be aware of, in one of our hospices. So we're really, really pleased about bringing that local expertise working on this project. So that's really, I guess, the main update as to where they are with the fundraising. It is progressing. They've got the right officers in place. They've got people with both national and local experience. And we're 2 weeks in. I'm aware of having attended things like the Basildon Business Group. I was on a call only this week with Swan Housing and them. So it's progressing as we would expect, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I just comment. I think the way it's going is excellent. I was at the meeting, I think it was last week, with Onside, with the people who are going to operate the youth zone in Basildon and the fundraising team, and the plans are well ahead, and it's going to be a fantastic thing for the borough. So, any comments? Anybody wish to come in? Councillor Dad's talking about the youth zone.
Mr. Chairman, I will talk to this item and move on, but you have silenced me on talking the item before, which is outrageous. I will complain.
Talk about the youth zone, please, if you wish to.
Yes, but I'm just setting out my protest.
You've made your point, Councillor Dad.
Stop interrupting me. Now, in relation to this item, please don't interrupt me if you've called me. Now, in relation to the youth zone, I am concerned about the fundraising. I understand the officer on side is going to attempt to fundraise, and that I understand. But I want to know if there is a gap in the funding of the 800,000, how is that going to be met? Because we know it's challenging times at the moment in relation to COVID. I've looked at the charity, the overall arching umbrella, that the charity regarding this charity and site. So I'm concerned, given that they've recorded as a public record that there are challenging times ahead with COVID, and what businesses will be there to support it. So if there is a gap, how is that gap going to be funded? Because it's a lot of money. I can see the officer indicated to speak, but there is a loss of revenue of 350,000 roughly for the car park. There's a 400 revenue that we have to subsidise it by, and there's about 800,000 needed by corporate sponsors. Where is the money coming from if that is not matched? It's all well and good to say the fundraising, we've got a good team, we're going to get out there and fundraise. What happens if that fundraising is not met? Who pays the shortfall?
Thank you, Councillor Dads. All I will say from my point of view, having spoken to the people, I'm absolutely confident the fundraising or the 800, the rest of the money will be met.
So you will personally guarantee it then?
No, don't interrupt me now, Councillor Dads. I didn't interrupt you this time. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you. David from Onside is here and has got his hand raised, Councillor. I suggest bringing him in.
I can't see a hand raised because I can't see a name.
Sorry.
Okay, I can see
David.
I can see you now.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Good to meet you, and thanks very much for bringing me in, Councillor Harrison. Yes, we're very confident we'll raise the money. So we have a philanthropy model or major donor model for how we raise money for youth zones, both the capital and the revenue. So far we've built 12 new youth zones around the country, and for each of those we've raised between 3 and 4 million capital and 800 grand plus revenue. They're all running successfully, so we're very confident in our model. Yeah, we're just starting in Basildon, so it's early days yet, but we've got a really strong prospect list, and the initial reactions we've had in Basildon have been really positive. So the feedback from the Basildon Business Group, over 20 people on that, all really enthusiastic and keen to get involved themselves and introduce us to others. As Councillor Taylor mentioned, we're already talking with some of the major businesses in Basildon, and those conversations are going really well. So our model, with the philanthropists, it's a matter of us getting to know them and them getting to know us. It's a large, bold and complex project that's going to change thousands of young people's lives, and they need to understand it. They probably need to visit an existing youth zone virtually or in real life, hopefully. They probably want to meet some young people who are involved in it, maybe other funders who have already got involved, board members and so on. So we want to build a long-standing positive relationship with people who are going to get involved, and that's the sustainable model. So for example, 800 grand, our model is to ask for say 32 people, at least 32 people, to donate 25 grand a year each for at least 3 years. We call this our founder patron model. So I personally was involved in fundraising for the Croydon Youth Zone before I got this current role. I got 25 people involved, each giving 50 grand a year for at least 3 years. And since we opened that in 2019, many of those have renewed their pledges. And that's our experience, is once people have given for 3 years, they get in, they feel part of the family of the youth zone, and they're there for the long term. And many, despite COVID, Councillor Dadds, you mentioned the challenging COVID situation, many have increased their pledges, the amount that they're giving, precisely because of COVID. They recognise young people need extra support, they need the kind of support that a youth zone gives them, so they've actually increased the amount beyond their initial pledge. And that's our experience right across the network. So just last summer, we raised... You've not
answered my question.
So an additional question.
Please don't interrupt.
Yeah, so that's really helpful. One of your questions is what happens if we don't raise the money?
That was my only question.
Can you mute yourself, please, as I've asked at the beginning of the meeting?
So we think that's very unlikely to happen. It's never happened with the youth zones that we've opened so far, and we're really confident it won't. But in the initial situation of the charity struggling, because we set it up as an independent local charity with an independent local board of stakeholders. If they are struggling, then Onside as a national charity would get involved and would seek to run it. That may take a little time. And at the end of the day, if it really can't, if there was total failure of the charity, then the local authority would have stepping rights to take the lease back.
Thank you, David. That's the most useful. Councillor Dadds, but if you mute yourself when someone else is speaking, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. You've used lots of words, and that's why I was getting a bit frustrated, because you're good at PR and selling the project, and I expect that because that's what your job is. But I asked a specific question about if there's a shortfall, how is that funded? And in essence, what you're saying is that if the local charity, independent from Onside, can't raise it, they could go to an on-site that might step in, but if they don't step in, then it's for the local authority to in effect step in, or it closes. But so that's what I understand what at the position. If I'm wrong with that, you can correct me. But my next point is, you say that you positive prospects, potentially 32 companies pledging 25,000 for a 3-year contract. My question is how many of the 32 pledges have you got already signed up for 3 years? And whilst you say that you are confident, reading Onside's corporate accounts for the previous year, they are not so confident, and they in their own report say that they are challenging times ahead for COVID, uncertainty, and so that whilst you may be confident, you know, the corporate accounts, which are signed as true and fair, say that there might be challenging times ahead because of COVID. So that's why I'm asking about what certainty, what guarantees, how is it paid, so that the public and us as councillors know when we're funding this, what happens if there's a shortfall?
Yeah, so first question, we haven't got any of the 32. I think I think the Officer Taylor mentioned that. And within 2 weeks in, we wouldn't expect that. So we're just starting our fundraising campaign. It's going well. And we won't expect to give a running commentary because many of these conversations are anonymous or they're private conversations, and many funders like to remain anonymous. As we progress and we set up the website for the Youth Zone, you will see press releases and funders appear there and getting behind the project. And in terms of confidence, yes, it is challenging times across the economy. Some businesses are struggling, some businesses doing very well. And probably when we published our accounts, you know, at the end of last year, I think nobody knew how the current economic situation was going to work out. But in fact, we've been very positively surprised that funders who are finding things challenging have continued to support us. Some people, for example, online businesses have done very well and they've really stepped up their giving. So all in all, people have felt that, you know, young people and the local community is a real priority, even as their businesses face challenges. So that gives us a big confidence. I think from the people who are backing Onside and sharing the vision, that gives us confidence that we will be able to open and run the Youth Zone in Basildon. But especially following our experience the last 12 months, I think we're now even more confident than we were, say, 12 months ago.
Thank you, David. Mr. Brace, did you wish to come in on this?
Yeah, it's only to reassure members. Obviously, we cannot start the project per se putting a spade into the ground until such time as the funding is raised. So we certainly wouldn't, and obviously it's a grant to the Basildon Onside charity for the Youth Zone that we would be giving the money to, and of course we would not be giving that money over if the other funding was not available for the project to go ahead. So that's some reassurance. We wouldn't be building something that would be born to fail. So we would be ensuring there was support amongst the community and the business to be able to ensure we deliver a successful project. If the fundraisers come back in 3 months' time and have not raised a penny, then we would be back surely in a committee and we will be discussing what the options are to us. But we certainly wouldn't be pursuing the project in terms of build without that funding confirmed in place. So it's just to reassure members, we wouldn't be funding the entire project top to bottom, because that is firstly not the model that Onside follow, and there certainly isn't the budget allocation within our budgets this year to be able to fund that. With our commitment through the budget has been clear, that was agreed at this committee. So that's just to give assurance to members that we would need to have those commitments before we would pursue the project to fruition.
Thank you, Mr. Brace. Also, you will recall that as a decision of this committee, some was paid up front and the second lot is following discussions between at a certain time for Mr. Brace and myself to approve the second payment. Councillor Dadds.
Just coming back, Mr. Chairman, on the director's comments, there's a difference of the capital fundraising, which obviously I can understand. You wouldn't start the project until all the capital's in. My question is more around the operational cost annually. I think of about 1.2 million, and I think 100,000 comes from receipts, 400 I think from us, and the rest from sponsors. And it's that I'm particularly concerned about, the ongoing revenue. Whilst the insurances have been given about the success of fundraising, given the challenging times, it's that I'm concerned. And I don't know, I'll put in the sneaky question now, but I don't know, has ever a local authority had to step up to shore up the revenue cost of running the day-to-day operation because there's been a shortfall of corporate sponsors?
Councillor, I'll ask the first bit of that, and can I let David answer the second bit, because David will be better to answer that. On the first part, Councillor, exactly the same on the capital raise. We would obviously be concerned, and I would be raising that again with members at the appropriate time, if we'd raised the capital, but again had raised very little on the revenue side, then that would be an equal concern, because that again would be setting it up not to operate. Why would we want to build something that hadn't got the revenue to fund it? So that's something that we will continue to monitor and work with on side, and there will be regular reports back to committee on the progress of that, taking David's comments about those that wish to remain confidential that are donating. But we obviously will have to be keeping an eye on both sides, revenue and capital coming in, because without either of those, clearly it will not be a success. So this is, as David said, it's only 2 weeks, so we've a long way to go, but we will continue to monitor that, and we'll raise any concerns that we have and bring those back to this committee or any other relevant committee, obviously in the new municipal year.
Thank you. David, did you want to answer the first question?
Yes, about local authorities bailing out youth zones. Yes, I'm not aware of any local authorities helping out youth zones that have got into financial difficulty. And I don't think any local authorities have increased their contributions, from the initial pledge, as it were. I'm pretty sure neither of those situations have happened, and certainly not bailing out. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chairman. I have unmuted myself this time because I did want to speak on the work programme, but I will send you an email about the issue which I wanted to raise there anyway. Like Councillor Dadds, I've got some serious concerns over the funding model for the youth zone. I do understand the issue of anonymity with donors, because there are so many good causes out there that do want to get money that you just cannot afford to support every good cause that you would like, and that applies probably to all of us as individuals as well as to corporations. A number of concerns really. On the capital costs, Mr. Mellis mentioned in other areas £3 to £4 million of capital had been raised through the fundraising. My understanding is that the model requires a minimum of 4 million to be able to be constructive. Forget the running costs for the moment. So perhaps we can just get a little bit of clarity on that aspect. The council, as things stand at the moment, is looking at a £4 million capital contribution and 400,000 a year. My question on the 400,000 a year, is that for the entire, I think it's 125-year lease this is talked about, is that for the entire 125 years that's being expected? And on the question of the revenue donors, I hear what Mr. Mellis said about the model of 25,000, or maybe even more generous in some cases, on a 3-year agreement. If we're looking at in excess of 100 years for this facility to be operated, what's likely to be the renewal scenario for those donors? And I'm just minded of the high quality businesses which we've seen cease trading over the last few years. We've seen Debenhams, House of Fraser, and I appreciate it's not necessarily all retailers that you'll be going to, but it's indicative of the challenges that businesses have faced. And with the growth of internet and IT business practices, I can certainly foresee considerable consolidation amongst those businesses. So at the end of 3 years, maybe some of those businesses will be merged with other organisations out of the area. If I owned a business in Basildon, I would not want to support the barking model, for example. So where are we going to go from there when, as will inevitably happen, some of those donors withdraw? And where will you go with the building itself? Because 125-year lease, that building will not stand there for 125 years if my understanding of the way it's going to be designed and built anything like correct. It will at some point have to have the site cleared, be rebuilt, start again. So perhaps some thoughts from Mr. Mellis on that as to how sustainable it really is in the genuine long term. Thank you, Chairman.
David, if you wish to come in on those points, but
absolutely,
you weren't brought along here tonight for a grilling, because it is well the opposition are opposed to the youth zone.
No, it's my pleasure.
We're not opposed to it. We're not opposed to it, Mr. Chairman.
I ask you to mute yourself, please.
We're not opposed to it, but don't say that. We support it, but it's about the funding. Well, don't say that then. Don't quote me.
Right, okay. Councillor Daggs.
Don't quote me. I'm in favour of it. It's the funding I'm concerned about.
Until then, don't interrupt. Otherwise, I will move that you no longer be heard. And after that, in the Constitution, I'll ask you to be thrown out.
Yeah, but don't quote me.
Now be quiet, please.
No, don't treat me with respect, and I will treat you with respect.
God, dear.
But yeah, very happy to answer the questions. And I think, it's an unusual and innovative model. So I understand that people, it takes a while to get your head around it. We have published some FAQs. If you go on our website, you'll find most of this information already there under the Basildon Youth Zone section. So do have a look at that, and it'll probably answer most of your questions. And I think many of these questions are answered in the report as well. But yeah, so 4 million construction. So we've been building these over the last decade, and gradually costs increase. So the first ones were 4 million, then 6 million, and then as building inflation goes up. So the current building cost for our model is 8.4 million in total. So we are committed to raise 4.3 million, and the local authority is contributing 4.1. So hopefully that answers the question about the change in cost. So basically 50% of whatever the capital cost is at the time of approval, we commit to raising half of that. In terms of the long-term commitment, I think perhaps Paul Brace might like to come in on that a little bit later. But I think, there's an initial commitment for the first few years in terms of the revenue commitment, that 400k, and that's fantastic. And we believe Basildon Council, Basildon population, Basildon Town will so love the youth zone that they'll want to keep renewing that to keep up the impact as much as possible on an ongoing basis. So we want to be fully knitted into the public services and be such a good partner with Basildon Council in helping your young people that you'll want to keep renewing that for the long term. You're absolutely right, the building won't last 125 years. So we expect to knock it down probably at least twice, maybe 3 times in that time. and do a similar capital fundraising campaign and start again. It'll, you know, maybe a similar model. Who knows? 50 years time, what the needs of young people will be, the stuff they'll be into. So it'll be time for, you know, there'll be renovation, and our aim and our practice is to keep them in tip-top condition. So, for example, if you go to the Croydon one now, if you go to the Wigan one, you know, that's been open 2 years. If you go to the Wigan one, been open, you know, 5 or 6 years. The Bolton one has now been open 20 years. You'll find them all brand spanking. You know, they look amazing, and that's the way. It's high quality for the young people, and they also respect it, so they look after it more if you keep it in tip-top condition. So we keep investing in terms of renovating it, but there does come a point when the whole building, you often have to start again. So we look forward to doing that. In terms of the business model, there definitely is some diversification. So you'll start off with those 25, 30 founder patrons, and then other businesses get on the bandwagon as it goes along. You know, initially we've got two fundraisers. They don't have time to talk to every business involved in Basildon. If people just want to donate time and they don't want to get to know us, I mean, if they just want to donate without taking the time to get to know us, that's fine. But we'd probably rather they hold off, let those founder patrons get involved first. They lay the foundation, 800 grand in pledges, and then, you know, many other businesses will come on top of that, some larger donations and some smaller, but everybody will want to get involved because it is going to be such a positive thing. So in terms of the funding model, it does diversify a little bit. There's often community fundraising, online fundraising, all that stuff comes in later, and that just adds to it. Yes, some businesses do drop out over time. Our experience is as something like 80% renew year on year. So it's an ongoing process, keeping the business community engaged, just as the nature of the economy changes. We have had a huge amount of support from online businesses. So as the economy changes, we're very entrepreneurial, we're very ambitious, and we have those kind of connections, so that hasn't really been a problem. And in fact, it's probably been to our advantage in some ways. And then I think those were your main questions. Sorry if I've missed any, do ask again.
Thank you, David. I'll bring Councillor Ferguson in now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, may I take this opportunity to thank Mr. Mellis for addressing the committee this evening and for all his work on this exciting project. And like you, Mr. Chairman, I attended the meeting that we had with Onside last week, and just the feeling of excitement from everyone that was involved. It's a really exciting project for young people across this borough, and it's really important that we're working with a partner that shares our ambition for young people across the borough as well. Mr. Mellis mentioned that residents will show love for the youth zone, and you don't have to knock on many doors to residents across this borough to hear the demands for good quality youth services for young people, and it's something that parents, grandparents, young people themselves are always asking for, is good quality youth service provision, and that's exactly what I think we're bringing to the borough. We've had reassurances tonight on the long-term sustainability of the proposal. And the development that we'll see very soon. And I was convinced before the meeting that we were working, before the meeting last week, that we're working with an excellent partner to deliver an excellent project for young people across this borough. And I'm even more convinced today that we're working with a partner that's got a strong track record, that's done this in other parts of the country, and that will deliver a programme that will transform thousands of young people's lives across this borough. And I want to thank everyone that's been involved in this project for their work.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ferguson. I'm now going to move on. The report is only for noting, and I'm going to now move on to item 6, the residual waste arrangements. I'd like to thank.
Sorry, Chairman, I thought you were going to come back to me when you called
Buckley.
Councillor
I'm talking. Don't you start. Listen, Councillor Buckley and Councillor Dadds, at the last meeting, you voted against even having this in the work programme, but you're still taking the opportunity to talk about it all the time, and you didn't even want it in the work programme. Thank you, David, for coming tonight. Most useful. Thank you. It will be a success. Item 6, residual waste arrangements. I think Mr. Hendry.
Thank you, Chairman. At previous meeting of Neighbourhoods and Public Spaces, I was asked to bring back an update on what's happening with residual waste arrangements for the borough. I've included a report for members to consider tonight. Ultimately, Basildon operates within a 2-tier authority, and as those members said at the beginning of the call, who have an Essex County Council hat on as well. Essex County Council is the disposal authority, so our ability for influence and our control over that part isn't within Basildon Council's control. So this report is brief, but it does provide an update on what's currently happening with residual waste within the borough, and that where we are likely to go from the 1st of April 2021. Ultimately, the Joint Municipal Waste Management Strategy for Essex contracts us to dispose of material through the Mechanical Biological Treatment Facility, otherwise known as MBT, in Courtauld Road. Currently, the operations are suspended from there, but at any point that becomes operational again, subject to that contract with the County Council, we could be diverted back in there at 48 hours notice. Obviously, we do have contingency arrangements in place. And the contingency arrangement for our residual waste is, we've been notified that it will be Bell House landfill site in Colchester from the 1st of April this year. And as such, we will need to put in place arrangements to get material there by way of a transfer station, for which we will be recompensed from Essex County Council as part of a tipping away payment as part of the inter-authority agreement between us and Essex County Council. Ultimately, the update report has two recommendations for the committee tonight. The first one is that the committee notes the contents of the report, and the second one is that the committee approves officers to undertake joint working and procurement activity alongside neighbouring local authorities to deliver operationally suitable residual waste arrangements from the 1st of April 2021. What that means is that we will be looking alongside partners in Castle Point and Rochford councils to potentially engage the market, because it's not environmentally friendly or convenient for us to divert our residual waste and our collection vehicles all the way to Colchester. So the anticipation is that we will be looking to find, as a contingency arrangement, a transfer facility that was convenient for all three authorities to bulk and haul the material up to Colchester as required, obviously as directed by Essex County Council. So hopefully that's a little bit of an update report, but I am able to take any questions on that.
Thank you, Mr. Hendry. I thought it was important this report comes tonight because we need to give the officers approval to undertake the joint working arrangements with possibly Castle Point and Rochford to see if we can find a transfer station. Okay, Councillor Blake, did you have your hand up? I thought you waved. Okay, Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick point on this. The conclusions or recommendations in the report are appropriate. But a question for Mr. Hendry. Obviously, this all comes about because of the legal situation with the Tovey waste plant, which I think Mr. Hendry is well aware of and is still within the court process. My expectation, this is my expectation, not anything I've heard from County Hall, just to make that absolutely clear. We have a plant standing in Courtauld Road at a cost of circa £100 million. Whatever happens, whether it's done by receivers, the county council or some third party, I think it is likely to come back into use at some point. Obviously, that requires the legal situation to be resolved before that scenario arises. So my only issue with this is to ensure that as and when it does come back onto line, that we're not committed to two contracts that we've got to pay for. So perhaps if Mr. Hendry can address that, and to say if I do want to come back on an item, I'd appreciate if you let me, which you didn't on the last one, Chairman.
Mr. Hendry.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Buckley, for your question. Absolutely right. This is what we are looking for, is a contingency arrangement on the proviso that the contractual arrangement is via Essex County Council. Essex County Council divert our material where it is most operationally suitable. As far as I'm concerned, the MBT is still the contracted disposal facility. So what we will do is we'll make sure that we've got sufficient break clauses in any tender exercise, and obviously dependent on the value of that will be where the authority sits to award that contract. And obviously if it goes above a certain value, then the authority would be coming to this committee, but it depends on the value of the contracts. We haven't done the soft market engagement yet, but we are planning to build in break clauses within the contract that mean that we wouldn't fall foul of any of our obligations under the IAA, and making sure that, you know, if we are diverted elsewhere, that we have got sufficient wiggle room. I think is probably not the legal term, but sufficient room for manoeuvre to make sure that we're meeting our obligations under that.
Mr. Brace.
I mean, it's just to also assure you, Councillor Buckley, we will be working quite closely with Essex County Council, so we're not involved clearly in the legal dispute. So we will obviously take the lead from them in terms of timing, etc. So James and I will constantly be in touch to make sure that that exact thing doesn't happen, that we suddenly have two bills to pay. Yeah, give you assurance on that. We're not doing it on our own, as it were.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Good point. Okay. I think it's quite a simple one, this one. To note the committee notes the contents of the report, and we approve officers to undertake joint working and procurement activity alongside neighbouring local authorities to deliver operationally suitable residual waste arrangements from the 1st of April 2021. If you'd like to unmute yourself, we'll take a vote on those recommendations. Thank you. Councillor Dadds.
Against.
Against. Councillor Buckley.
For.
Sorry, didn't get that. For. Sorry. Councillor Ferguson.
In favour. Councillor
Reid.
In favour.
Councillor Blake.
In favour.
And myself in favour. Right, thank you very much indeed. We move on then to item 7, the waste strategy update, which is on pages 25 to 34. Before we start, there'll be a presentation shortly. I just want to indicate that following the waste strategy working group last evening, the priorities changed slightly. So on the recommendations, recommendation 4 will be deleted and substituted with that the cross-party waste member working group be instructed to review the council's approach to communication, education and enforcement of waste services across the borough in light of the changes detailed in the forthcoming environmental bill, with recommendations to be reported back to the Neighbourhoods and Public Spaces Committee. That's in substituting for 4. It's because we've made some good progress at the working group, as will be shown tonight on this particular part, which was the separation of food and garden waste, which I believe was a very successful trial. And if James, Mr. Hendry, are you going to do the, I know Mr. Bagley's here as well.
I'm going to try and see if this works.
You'd like to introduce the item and then do the presentation, because the details, a lot of the details are in the report of the trial, which I think is very good. If you use the presentation part, I think that will explain it even better in detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. And yeah, just by way of introduction, we've been coming back fairly regularly with the work and progress that we've been doing through the Waste Member Working Group, progress on the Environment Bill and on the Council's waste strategy as well. And part of the reason why I'd like to share a presentation with members tonight is that we did have a couple of late responders to the food waste trial. So what I will do is if I run through those quickly, just bear with me for a sec, and hopefully my screen loads okay.
It's not shared. That's it.
Okay, can everybody see the screen okay? Has that come through okay? Fantastic, thank you. Brilliant. Okay, so following the decision of a previous meeting of Neighbourhoods and Public Spaces, we were given the go-ahead to run a small-scale trial of separate food waste collection for recycling across the borough. We picked 5 roads across the 5 towns. We knew it was a small number, but we wanted to start small. We wanted to get some real good qualitative feedback from our residents about what worked and what didn't work. Of the 102 properties in the 5 roads that we picked, there were 99 that took part. The ones that didn't, I think, were either on holiday or the properties were vacant at the time. So it took 6 weeks across December and January, and as highlighted at the previous meeting, that was a good time of year to try it, because obviously Christmas plans changed a lot in 2020 for people, but more food waste is likely to be produced during that time as well. So what we asked residents to do, separate their food waste from their garden waste and use a food caddy that we provided to them. I think at this point we've got a picture of Alex there, and I think we'd particularly like to say thank you to the collection crews who managed to fit this in alongside what is the busiest period of the year. Our waste levels across the board were up last year with more people being at home and habits changing, and December and January are our busy times for waste collection anyway. Despite that, we managed to get the trial fitted in as well. So that was really, really good feedback, and thank you for the crews for supporting that. In terms of the communications we received 52 responses from those who took part. That's a 53% response rate. 96% of people received the information leaflet that we sent, and our communications was rated at 4.5 out of 5 from the people who took part in the trial. So a bit of feedback on the right hand side there. It was overall positive feedback on the leaflet, the letter and the frequently asked questions. They found it clear with a good reference point and fairly helpful. Overall improvements were that we could provide more detail on what can and can't be disposed of in the food caddy, as well as more clarity on the trial ending. We've obviously taken that back on board as a team for future. What was really encouraging is 73% of the people that responded to us said they would happily be contacted for further information or to take part in future trials. So that's a really powerful asset to us, in that we've got a group of residents who are engaged in this, and we can go back to them to sound off and run ideas that come up as part of the Environment Bill. And we've said all along through the work that we've done on the waste strategy, we want to do this alongside residents. There's going to be some things that we don't have control over. There's going to be some things that we do have areas to change and tweak, and that's where we're going to want resident feedback as part of that. So that was really encouraging. Onto the results. In terms of the containers, the majority of people who responded to the survey found the indoor kitchen caddy, which was provided, of which there's a picture at the top right. They found it just right. Sounds a bit like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, but they found it quite good. General feedback was that they wanted to find a better way of seeing how the liners could be secured to the caddy. There were some storage issues that were raised, and there was some feedback that larger households they found them too small for that. They felt that the lockable handle was good, but requested that there would be a better seal so the food didn't cause a smell. Overall, found it adequate and well designed. In terms of the external caddy, so this is the 23-litre box which was put at the curbside for collection. Again, the majority of respondents found it the right size. Some general feedback was that it didn't close properly, a bit of a tight fit over the Christmas period, but it might be more for larger households, and that the choice of a larger one would be good. This is really good feedback for us, isn't it? Because it means that we can then say in the future, okay, well, if we need to provide, our policy needs to say that either we allow larger ones for larger families, or perhaps additional ones, and would we collect them? But that's worth taking on board for that in the future. Again, found it adequate and well designed. Request was that we add some wheels to make it easier to take it out. So that's good feedback. I'm not sure that those are on the market, but it's worth looking into before we commit to expanding the trial or rolling the service out. We asked participants in the trial how many liners they used a week. If you remember from the previous model, we'd base that around 1 per week per household. Majority of people are using 2 to 3 per week, with 10 households saying they use 0 to 1, and 4 plus liners being used by 16 households. Feedback in terms of the liner strength was rated 3.92 out of 5. Residents scored themselves as being somewhat willing to purchase additional liners themselves if they needed to. In terms of the size of the liners, the majority of people found them to be just right. There was some general feedback around the liners to say it would be good to have the ties included on them, that the material was found to be too thin and flimsy, being more liquid resistant, that there was nothing wrong with them, and I prefer the ones from Tesco. So it's all useful information that we found. In terms of behaviour, these are some of the kind of key figures that we found as part of the feedback from that. Do residents think that by having a separate food waste service, it will reduce the amount of food waste they generate? Majority of people said no. Some people said yes, it would. You know, identifying that segregating that material would drive down the behaviour. So, a bit of a split there. Prior to the trial taking place, we had all residents, or 36 people, saying that all of their food waste was recycled using their green wheeled bin, with the numbers obviously as we go down from most, some and none decreasing. During the trial, more people moved up there. So rather than none going from 4 down to 1, some going from 7 down to 1, those residents became most. So they were putting most of their food waste in during the trial. The reason that it went from 36 down to 35 is that we had a resident who was putting some of their food waste still in their garden waste bin if they had something, you know, to excess. So that's why that number went down there. But that's a very specific piece of feedback to that one resident. Overall, in terms of service performance, we had a rating from the participants of 4.62 out of 5. And we asked, would you be happy for the collection service to be introduced in the future? 88% of respondents, 46 respondents said yes, they would. We asked our collection crews to undertake some monitoring as well. In terms of the caddies being presented, we got an average of 68% participation a week. And to put that into perspective, what we would normally do is take a 3-week rolling average and then add up the number of people over the course of those 3 weeks who participate to get a realistic participation rate. But I think they show that one of the things we learned is that the participation dropped off in the last week of the trial, perhaps because people thought that the trial had already concluded and that we were going to be collecting the containers that day. But of those where the caddy was presented, the 47% of them were presented as full, 27% half full, and 20% quarter full. So there we go. And in terms of the caddy usage, you can see how that changes over the course of weeks as well. So where the caddy was fuller around Christmas time. So that's what we expected to happen, was that people would have more food waste around the Christmas period. Feedback from residents around the garden waste service as well. You can see here that residents are more likely to put their bin out. This probably goes without saying, but I think it's useful to get feedback from residents on this, is that they're more likely to put their bin out for all collections during summer months, closely followed by spring, less so in autumn. And then in winter, the residents are putting their containers out for some collections or never over that period. So you can see that the usage changes quite drastically depending on the time of year. We also asked that the crews, as they were going around and collecting the food waste, that they were monitoring their participation rates in the garden waste service. The participation rates very low, average of 19% over the period that was monitored. But you can see, obviously, during different weeks, the number of containers which were put out. And where containers were being put out, they were being put out at predominantly either, you know, half full or under in the majority of incidents. In terms of a general summary then, largely positive feedback on the separate food waste collection service, and their residents, obviously 88% were wishing for that to be introduced in the future. There was some specific feedback around some operational adjustments to the service, which would need to be explored as part of any future service design. The put-out rate and container capacity use for garden waste was low over the trial period. This, coupled with the survey feedback, show there's less of a requirement for the garden waste service over the winter period for those who take part in the trial. And residents found the approach and content of the communications helpful and are willing to provide further feedback or take part in further trials if necessary. What does this mean in terms of implementation? We've got some of the roadmaps here about what that might mean in terms of when we may need to come back to neighbourhoods and public spaces in order to get certain things agreed. We are expecting the Environment Bill to be approved around the Glasgow Climate Conference later this year, so we're expecting that to be in this year. So in terms of the delivery timeline, what we would need to do to be live with a separate food and garden waste collection service, current timelines are that it will be June to September 2022, subject to achieving a 9-month lead time and achieving the timeline that we've got on here. The difficulty that we've got is we only have a guaranteed disposal point for mixed food and garden waste up until April next year. We'd said at previous reports on food and garden waste that there are two drivers here. One is the Environment Bill, which we now know is likely to be approved in October this year. The other one is likely to be the operational requirement, which is the disappearance of a disposal point for mixed food and garden waste, which at the moment could be April next year. Again, as with the previous section, we are in contact with Essex County Council, but that is a possibility for us, that that facility isn't guaranteed beyond April next year. Our potential timeline therefore shows delivery of a separate food and garden waste service between June and September 2022. As we mentioned, we're only guaranteed that disposal point until April 2022. There may be the possibility of an extension, but it's not guaranteed. So with that in mind, we might want to, subject to obviously agreement of Neighbourhoods and Public Spaces Committee, to look at options for implementation date to be brought forward to April 2022 to then meet that critical risk head on. The most critical part of that for us is going to be ordering vehicles. Members had expressed at previous meetings a preference for, and at the working group, preference for electric vehicles, with obviously the infrastructure and everything else that entails that. We're looking at currently between 9 and 12 months to purchase those vehicles and to make sure that we've got them here. So the lead times for those are significant, and we'd need to make sure that we got them in place, way in advance of any new service starting. But we have got options here, and I think that one of the things that we've identified, that the operational decision would need to be made in advance in order for the vehicles to be delivered in time for March 22 to avoid that risk and that cliff edge. But what it is clear is that we will have to segregate food and garden waste at some point, whether that's legislatively driven or operationally driven. The risk of not doing that is if we can't provide, if Essex County Council don't have an outlet for that material due to the market not providing one anymore, then the material could be landfilled from April 2022, which I'm sure is something that we want to avoid. We are continuing to work on the viability of electric vehicles as per previous recommendations and guidance from this committee and from the member working group. And we are looking at the amount and size of vehicles that we need in place. That is obviously subject to route optimization and testing the assumptions and looking at best practice data from elsewhere, and then applying that to see how that might work in Basildon. What we will likely need to do at some point as well is consult around the future of the garden waste service and the optional elements of the food waste service, including the size of the containers, the provision of liners, but not necessarily, depending on the legislation, the decision to separate food and garden waste. There are a few other options which we are considering, and we want to keep as many options on the table as possible, but one of those is around interim vehicle arrangements ahead of contract hire of new vehicles. There's potentially significant additional cost in that, and then you still have to purchase the electric vehicles on that as well. But that would get us through a short period of time if we needed to. One option that we could do would be to roll out food waste containers ahead of any vehicle changes, but what that would mean for residents, that means that we would have to ask residents to separate the material, but then we'd collect it together anyway. We'd commingle it until such point when we had the revised disposal point in place. That would mean that it's quicker to get the service out, but it means we're delivering a lower quality service to residents, and we're also not, we would be asking residents to do something where they segregate materials so then for us to collect them together. Not ideal, and I think that undermines a lot of our environmental messages that we've highlighted so far. Obviously, we had put the model forward before around fortnightly garden waste collections. We may be able to utilise existing vehicles on that to collect food waste in the interim, but that would be an inefficient process if that decision was made at the same time. We'd be obviously sending 26-tonne vehicles around to collect food waste when a 12-tonne or a 7.5-tonne vehicle, much smaller payload, much better fuel economy, would be better suited for the job. So I think that's a quick run through those results. And,
Thank you, James.
Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Please. Okay. That is the timeline. But tonight, basically, the discussion tonight is next steps following the trial. I think the trial was very successful. The responses were very good. There are some points in there we need to pick up, but the point, of course, behind all of this is the environmental bill, which is going to become law, and therefore we are dictated to some respect in that degree. The food and garden waste must be separated. And the timeline we've put in there, I think, is a good work, where a lot of work has gone on in the working group to get to this stage. And the trial is a success, and the recommendations tonight are on the order paper, plus the one I've added for item 4. Okay. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chairman. You're absolutely right. We're going to have no option but to separate food and garden waste. That's going to happen whether we like it or not. And it's quite right that we plan for that. I think though there's a number of issues relating to the observations that Mr. Hendry's made. I think the comment about asking the public to segregate materials and then commingling them ourselves actually makes us a bit of a laughing stock. So I think we must avoid that. And I'm sure, like me, you've had complaints where, oh, they've chucked the pink bag in with the black bags type of comment. I don't think it's something that's happening very often, but when people see it, they get upset. Why should I bother to separate it if you're all going to put it back together again? A question on the vehicles. Now, we have a number of vehicles at the moment. I'm not sure exactly how many are in the fleet, which, as far as I know, are all diesel vehicles. So the transition over to electric vehicles is one that probably will get forced upon, even though I have some issues around electric vehicles on a personal basis. But do we actually need additional vehicles, or is it just a case of changing the vehicles that we have? Because I'm mindful of the penalties on some of the contracts that we may have on those vehicles. Yes. The trial that was conducted, I'm glad to hear it was considered to be a success. When it was first suggested, I did put forward some reservations about the areas in which the trial was conducted and the size of the trial. And my view is that having taken place over December, January, when there is virtually no garden waste anyway, that it probably made it, if you like, too easy for people to comply with it. So I'm going to suggest an addendum to recommendation 1, Chairman, which Councillor Dadds will second, and that's that we note the results of the food waste collection trial undertaken in December, January of 2021, and that we commission a further larger trial in the March-April period before we implement any changes. And the reason for that, I'll quote my own personal experience. Like everybody else, we have a green wheelie bin outside, and I have a very large garden, which might be my good or bad fortune, depending on the way you look at it. And if I looked at it over the last 3-4 weeks, probably a quarter full. If I look at it in the next 4 or 5 weeks, I'll probably be using a second bin because I've got 2. So I think by taking that trial at that period when garden waste is at a bare minimum or near non-existent, actually is not creating a very fair impression on it. So I would suggest that that be done. Your amendment to recommendation 4, I think, makes sense. So you're taking out the issues about the residual waste and bulky waste and just talking about comms, education and enforcement, as I understood you said. So if I'm wrong on that, if you could correct me, I'd be grateful. So really, I think it was a good exercise to do, but not a large enough scale and at the wrong time of year. So hence my amendment. But so I don't know if Mr. Hendry can respond to the questions that I raised at the start. Thank you, Chairman.
Right. If Councillor Dadds wishes to second it first.
Yes, and can I speak now if I'm seconding? Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So I concur and support the views held by Councillor Buckley. I just have one other observation on the on the trial. Are we benchmarking with anyone? Because, for example, as you know, whilst I'm a councillor of the borough because I have a business in Billericay High Street, I live in Chelmsford Borough and we have these bins already. So I'm wondering whether there's any learning from neighbouring boroughs whether we can have some shared experience, because obviously I have a small little bin like that with a liner, and so obviously we have the same exercise. So I'm wondering, and I think it works. You know, you've got your paper, you've got your card, you've got your food, and actually, time you've done all your recycling, there's very little that goes into the black sack, so and to the bins. So, but I know that before we raise this, is that it's about storage, flats. How do you put where you put the bin out? I mean, so I know we've got some challenges with the way that the street scene and the layout for some of the residents. So I'm just wondering if we're getting any learning from some of our neighbours, because even though we've done a trial, and I suggest that we have, as Malcolm has suggested, a further trial, what learning are we picking up from our neighbours or benchmarking from our like Harlow, that's got similar layouts and street scenes challenges that we face? That's all. Thank you, Mr. Harrison.
Okay, thank you. On that question, James.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to respond to the questions that have been raised, if that's okay. Yep. To Councillor Buckley's point, what we've got in here with recommendation 3 is around the delegating the authority to the Director of Community and Environment to approve and draft a detailed operational consultation and engagement delivery plan. So that would detail how we would go about it, what we would do, what that impact that has about when we buy vehicles, what vehicles we have left. Bearing in mind that separating the food and garden waste currently doesn't do anything to the garden waste until that model is consulted on and adopted. So we are obviously going through things, the route optimization. We put a section in here around digitization and making sure that we haven't got more vehicles than we need, or too few, more importantly, as well. So that is in there as well to come back to a future meeting of neighbourhoods and public spaces. So hopefully that helps to answer that question. To Councillor Dadds' point, absolutely, we've been working on this for the best part of 2 years now, and a big part of what we've been doing is talking to other authorities, both our near neighbours and across the country. We're quite fortunate in the fact that Basildon's one of there's only I think 2 or 3 remaining authorities in Essex that don't already have a separate food waste collection. So we are talking to our equivalents across the country and seeing about what's worked well, what hasn't worked well. That information, I think I've made a reference to it in this report to say that the trial is great, but the trial should be taken into conjunction with other information that we've presented to the member working group, that we've presented previously on food and garden waste collections. We're also talking to colleagues at WRAP. We were very fortunate, and WRAP is the Waste and Resources Action Programme, which is run through DEFRA. We were very fortunate that a colleague from WRAP was able to come along to one of the waste member working groups as well to talk about things and put some of the things that we're talking about in context. So we are keeping those dialogues open. And I think that this has been not just about something that we've designed ourselves, but what we want to do is we want to take those influences, but also let's talk to our own residents and make it right for Basildon. So it has been a listening and engagement exercise so far, and that's been really rewarding. I think that the thing you did mention, a very good point there around flats, hard to reach areas. At previous reports that we've written about the waste strategy and the development of it, we've coined the term the 85 and the 15%, and we've consciously we haven't mapped out exactly what those 15% is yet, but we know there are hard to reach properties, there are flats. We will be doing a lot more work on that, but we understand that there is a lot more work that needs to go into those areas. So what we are proposing, the models that we've looked at so far, are focused on easy to reach, easy pass, single pass houses, with further detailed works to come around the 15%. So that's flat blocks, hard to reach areas, those sort of properties. So yeah, absolutely, we've been referencing that regularly. We've been discussing that at Waste Member Working Group, and that will be something which will be fed back in future reports as well.
Thank you, James. On Councillor Buckley's addendum, I will vote against it not just to oppose Councillor Buckley. It's just that the trial, the green waste is, we were noting what happened to green waste. The green waste wasn't part of the trial. The trial was a separation of the food waste. And the working group is looking at these, as James said, we had someone come along from DEFRA talking to us how we go about it to understand the environmental bill, so that we deal first with food waste. As we were doing that, you look at the green waste, but we haven't dealt with green waste yet. The next thing we're dealing with is dried recyclables, and then we will move on to residual bulky waste and green waste. So there's a roadmap. It's a difficult one. There's so much work gone into it with the working groups, behind the scenes with officers and the officer team working on this. And as chairman, I've got involved in this heavily, and it is something which this council has got to do to change the way we collect waste. And I think the point that Councillor Dadds make is important, and that is why for our discussions last night on the type of things you would use for collecting or segregate and then collecting recyclables is important. And we look to what other authorities doing on that as well. So it's an ongoing thing, and I've been quite keen that every NPS meeting we bring back where we are. We're not rushing the job. We want to get it done properly. And I think it's important at the end of the day, whenever that is, it might be 2 years' time, and whoever's chairman here after May will have to continue with this because it's an ongoing thing. So that's my reason I would oppose it, Councillor Buckley. It's easy to have another trial. I don't think it would do much difference on the food waste, and that is what we want. That was what we concentrated on. Can I bring Mr. Brace in first?
It's also, Councillor, we've got some concerns that we won't know exactly what will change in the waste part of the Environment Bill. We know there is some toing and froing around green waste, but we're not sure what the outcome of that will be. But we do know that food and garden will be separated because it's the best way to have it is as a separated item. So we just the trial may not be something that we may be able to do in the bill. So I take your point, Councillor Buckley. We would like to do it in a bigger area, maybe a bit later, but until we see the contents of what is going to be agreed or go into legislation, we're just unsure what to do. So I take your point on a bigger area, but I'm not sure that we possibly could be trialling something that the bill will not allow us to do. So it's a sort of looking brief really for green waste at this moment in time, I would say.
Thank you, Mr. Brace. Councillor Buckley, do you want to come back?
Just briefly, Chairman. Yeah, I accept what you say about the future for waste, and having previously held the portfolio a few years ago and worked on it at Ted County Hall as well. It's actually a surprisingly interesting topic. But having said that, whilst I hear what Mr. Hendry says, I still think that there is value in going ahead with the trial as I've suggested. Whilst it might well be that when the bill comes through, there are changes to it, I think it's about measuring people's habits. And I think when we start looking, as you rightly pointed out, or it might have been Councillor Dad's pointed out, about the harder to reach areas in particular, the areas where I live, where I think pretty much everybody up the road has a large garden. And I think, you know, when you look at the ease with which you can put your food waste into the green bin, I think that's going to be a big ask to get people to change that habit. We have to do it. And that's why I think we need the further large-scale trial across a much more mixed range of areas to actually show whether the problem is of the extent I fear, or whether in fact there is no problem. Either way, it would inform us. Yes, we may have to tweak it according to the bill, but I think it would be information that would be valuable, and avoids us making a decision based on information that was collected at the wrong time of year and everything else. So I've made those points previously. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reid. You're muted, I think.
Sorry about that. Yes, I think with, I mean, I will also oppose this, but Councillor Buckley has said about people with big gardens. I think that did come up at one of the working group meetings where it was sort of muted that we might have to consider, if people have got large gardens, to maybe give them two green bins, so that would accommodate. I mean, most people probably one would be sufficient, but if people do have a large garden, then it's feasible that they could have 2 green bins for their garden waste, and that would, you know, be helpful to those. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. The point is, and I'm going to make this point quite clear. The trial on this trial was for the collection of food waste. The green waste was an add-on look at to see what happened to it. The green waste, we haven't had a trial with green waste yet. As Mr. Bracer said, that will be down the line. I think we've got to treat this in a proper way. The working group has been working very hard on these things, and we've, I think, established a timeline on that working group, which I think will work. And I would personally like to stick to that. Not just I'm chairman of the working group, it is a cross-party working group, and it's going very, very well. In fact, we're already planning the next trial, which is a bigger trial on the collection of recyclables and segregate recyclables. We've picked a much bigger area, and that will take place probably in June time. And at that same time, we would do, Mr. Henry, I'm talking out of turn, stop me now in a moment. At the same time, we will be looking there at food waste, see what they do with it, and looking at things which you can use, not as part of that trial, but as an add-on while it's happening, see what's happening. Am I correct, Mr. Hendry?
I think we're currently working our way through the obviously through the trial, and that will have to come back to Neighbourhoods and Public Spaces at a future meeting anyway. But you're absolutely right. When we're in an area, we want to be talking to residents about their waste habits, and I think that one of the things that has been really good on this project so far, whether that's in the member working group or in the sessions that we've had with staff and with colleagues, is that everybody brings their own perspective, and it is something that everybody, whether you live in the borough or outside of the borough, you have your own waste collection. So people are bringing their own experiences. We had a really good session where we were looking at how to report a missed bin, and we picked a dozen different councils, and we said, okay, what works well, what doesn't work well, and that's the way that we're approaching this. So we're bringing lots of those experiences together, but we want to find out how this works holistically. We want to get that feedback. And as with the people from the food waste trial, those 73% of the people who said, you know, please include us in the future, please talk to us about these things, we want to find their opinion. So this is about growing something for the long term.
Thank you. Councillor Blake, did you have your hand up? Thank you.
Yes, I did. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I have some sympathy with what Malcolm said. There's no doubt, and understand that. But as you say, it is what we've been focusing on already, and this will be further down the line. Again, I will say I think the working group has worked exceptionally well. It has its moments, as do every working group, but generally I think it's very good, sometimes entertaining. But it's working, it's working extremely well. And I think there's a couple of points that were mentioned, and I was hoping Pat was going to mention what she said last night, but she didn't, because I thought it was a very good point. It was the fact that, and I wasn't going to speak until she had, in case I stole her thunder, and it was regarding the food waste, in the sense that some people were saying that they were filling it up too much. Well, we feel, and certainly Pat did, and the group felt, that after a while, people's by educating themselves, their way of life will change, and they'll see how much waste they're actually producing. And I have to say, I did say last night, and I'll say it again, not in my house. There is no food waste other than in here. So it's and I think that will help the cause of the wastage going in. I think it was a very relevant point yesterday. And something that I certainly took on board. And I know Councillor Sargent also supported that at the time. So it is good. I won't support what, unfortunately, unusual for me, I won't support something that Malcolm proposed, purely on the basis, as you quite rightly said, Chairman, that the working group are working through all those. And the working group, certainly last night, was basically unanimous in the way we were going forward, virtually unanimous. But so it's working well. And I see no need to change it at the moment, because these things will come out. As you already said, the next phase of it is a very large scale study, and we'll pick up even more information from that. So I think it's going along. After many years, we will get there. There'll be trouble in the road, I'm sure, but we will get there eventually. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you and others have already said, the direction of travel around this is being set by government, and it's important that we respond to that, and that we have a clear time plan that we're working towards. And I just want to take this moment as a non-member of the working group to thank the working group for all the work that they've done in bringing these items to our attention this evening. As Mr. Henry said, it's important that we consider a broad range of opinions and broad range of views for us to discuss as a committee, and I think we've seen that through the working groups and through the previous items that have been brought to this committee to review. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank all the residents that were involved in the trial and the feedback that they provided. That's incredibly valuable. We can learn a lot from that, and it's important that we now consider that as we move forward. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Okay, I'm going to take the vote on the addendum proposed by Councillor Buckley, which I think is quite clear. So if you'd like to unmute yourselves, we'll take the vote. Councillor Dadds.
For.
Councillor Buckley.
For.
I'll be voting against that. Councillor Blake. People are moving around the screen.
Against.
Councillor Ferguson.
Against.
Councillor Reid.
Against.
Okay, that addendum is lost. I'd like to now move then to the recommendations on page 26 with the alteration which I have indicated earlier. One, that the committee notes the results of the food waste collection trial undertaken in December and January 2021, that the committee approves that this model will be included as an option as part of any future consultation exercise on the collection of food and garden waste. 3, that the Director of Community and Environment is given approval to develop a detailed operational, consultation and engagement delivery plan to be reported back to the Neighbourhood Public Spaces Committee. And 4, that the cross-party waste member working group be instructed to review the Council's approach to communication, education and enforcement of waste services across the borough, in light of the changes detailed in the forthcoming environmental bill, with recommendations to be reported back to the Neighbourhood and Public Spaces Committee. And 5, that the committee notes the progress towards the digitalisation of operational services. Okay, if you're unmuted, so I'd like to take the vote. Councillor Dadds.
For.
Councillor Buckley. Councillor Buckley.
Against.
Against. Councillor Reid,
Or
Councillor Ferguson,
In favour.
Councillor Blake,
In favour.
and myself in favour. That is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Henry, for that as well. Which means you can now come back on item 8, the street scene education enforcement trial update. Which is quite. I think the trial is a success. It will continue till I think towards the end of April. And the recommendation I propose tonight is that the success to date of the trial of the expanded environmental enforcement services, enforcement services is noted. So I think it has been a success. The details are there on the pages. The number of, it hasn't cost the council a penny. In fact, there's £21,221.50 due to the council. Some has been paid, some will, and the rest will be paid. It just comes in at different times. And the details of the number of the total 4,334 FPNs issued. Okay. Councillor Blake.
Thank you, Chair. Again, the recommendation is to note the progress towards the trial expanded enforcement service. I just have one question for the officer. It says here results of trial, and it gives us detailed notes of what the achievements are and all those things. But what it doesn't say what that's compared to. I mean, how do we if we're trying to say this is great, is it good news? I don't know whether that's good news or not, whether it's worked or not, because it's not got any comparison. Just wondering if the officer's got any sort of details that says it's working.
Right, good point. Good point. I think it is working because previous to that we only had our own enforcement people, and I think the figures do show it's a success. And Mr. Hendry, I hope you can explain that.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Blake, for the question. Obviously not bored of hearing my voice yet, so I'm happy to talk for some more. Has it been a success? And I think that the proof in the pudding is that this team were brought in to undertake a zero tolerance approach to enforcement. They have been issuing fixed penalty notices for a number of things. Fixed penalty notices we know are a deterrent. Everybody that gets a fixed penalty notice for littering is likely to change their habits. So they are a powerful deterrent, and National Enforcement Solutions have issued 4,334 so far on the trial for a number of offences. They are enforcing littering as well as fly tipping, duty of care. They have also issued fixed penalty notices for dog control orders as well. In terms of comparisons, the only thing I can really compare it to is a previous trial that we had through external enforcement a number of years ago. Conveniently, we've got 9 months worth of data. That trial had 9 months worth of information as well. Comparing apples and oranges, it was a different time. They were coming in with a different brief. They were only there to enforce really littering fines, whereas National Enforcement Solutions have been brought in with a wider remit to issue a wider range of fixed penalty notices. The number of fixed penalty notices issued is consistent. I think that the number that I had looking at the previous trial was around 4,018 for the same period. National Enforcement Solutions have issued 4,334. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just a quick question. I'm in favour of this type of enforcement. It's something we trialled before with a different company. It's certainly something I think that has a value to the vast majority of our residents. But on page 37, the final bullet point says about an allocation of 30,000 for legal services will be made in the budget. Okay, we've got to have the resource there to do what's necessary to prosecute where it's appropriate. But the last sentence there says, to date, 10 cases have been passed to the council for prosecution. None have yet been accepted and prosecuted. Well, I would have expected that legal would have started work. If the evidence was there to pass to legal in the first place, I'd like some observation on why they're not being prosecuted. I don't suppose for 1 minute they all happened last week, so perhaps Mr. Hendry could give some explanation on that. And just in terms of the budget for legal services, I don't object in principle to funding enforcement on these sorts of issues, but do we anticipate recovering some of that money through costs where we actually take people to court?
I think the answer to the last part is yes, we do, and we do get costs back on prosecution. I think this is a trial, and I think it has been successful, but I think that it will end in April sometime, and it cannot continue, in my view, as a trial. If we wish to continue with this type of enforcement, we would need to have a tender exercise, and I think there are some pieces in this trial which will need to be considered to how we do it differently, perhaps in a tender exercise. But I think the prosecution part of that, in my view, is part of that. I don't know if Mr. Hendry agrees. I'm only going on from what I know and what I see. Mr. Hendry.
Thank you, Chairman. And yeah, Councillor Buckley, thank you for your question. I think you're absolutely right to echo Councillor Harrison's point. This is a trial. Obviously, the thing that's happened during this trial has been a global pandemic, which has caused some difficulties around producing the prosecution case files and the speed at which we're able to rectify them and get them ready for court. Get them up to the Basildon standard so we're ready to prosecute them. I think that's where we're spending some officer time at the moment on refining that process, so that it's something that we've definitely learned throughout this trial, that's something we've noted that we want to improve the time that it's taken and the quality of court cases that we're getting. Obviously we won't send anything for prosecution unless we're 100% happy with it, that we think it's passing the right tests. And yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that we will need to wrap up as part of the final trial, and any subsequent tender exercise, if there was the approval to take that forward, that's definitely something that we want to improve upon.
Councillor Dadds.
Yes, thank you. I remember this being discussed initially, probably when I was on the committee last year. I did have some reservations then, and I still always do have reservations about this type of enforcement. I know that Kevin Blake, I think, was on it at the time or made some comments, and I think it is, and I agree, it is important that we tackle, littering, waste, etc. So that the principle I accept. I believe that we should always have a graduated approach about education, making sure people are informed. I note that there are a number of, through this scheme so far, a number of complaints. 4 have been upheld, 4 are pending, partially upheld. So, I mean, I want to understand a little bit more about that, so that we are updated about what the public who we serve are experiencing. Because there was a couple of videos out originally, I think, on being shared where, people were being followed in the town centre, and if they dropped something, that they would be getting a penalty. And obviously, hopefully, those teething problems have not occurred and reoccurring. So, I mean, I do see these officers patrolling in Billericay, going up and down, but I think, we've got to be careful that it's about a proportionate approach. In addition to that, I think the about the review, I think we should have had an update on the profit sharing, how those arrangements are working, because whilst I don't want to make a profit, I think if revenue is there, it goes back into education, litter bins, all that stuff that may be there. But nevertheless, there must be substantial revenue here because of the amount of fixed penalties. I don't know what the income is for the contractor, but I certainly would want to understand a bit more about what the revenue is, what the split's like, so that we are not bearing any costs for the legal. I understand, look, I mean, there will be a limitation period of 6 months for prosecution, and if they've not been laid as a summons, they're out of time. if they have been laid, then obviously they would be priority 3 or 4 within the court system and would not be heard yet, because obviously they're dealing with remand priority 1 and priority 2 cases. So, and I understand what we're being told by the officer, that they've got to meet a certain test. Obviously, that will be in the public interest test to prosecute. And so I think I would like to know more about that as we go forward. And certainly you're right, Mr. Chairman, that in relation to this exercise, it's for a year. We shouldn't be going beyond that, because we would need to be going out, one, improving on making sure that complaints are to a minimal, that we are getting the right balance between enforcement and levying a fine and education. Because there are some concerns. The last bit that I make is that the concern I had from a resident during the year is that they placed their waste out on the right at the right time, but it was just off their curtilage, and therefore they got a ticket for fly tipping, and they called that fly tipping. Whereas I understand fly tipping is something completely different. Maybe it's being waste is being disposed of in a country lane or on the side of the street or in a state. But fly tipping, if you've left your bag out too early or too late or just slight outside your curtilage, then you're getting a penalty. And then I think that was Kevin Blake's view last time, that he supported that. But I'm a bit more cautious about educating, making sure that we give a proportionate approach to our enforcement. They're my views on this report, because I think we're lacking some information and detail.
Councillor Dadds, some fair comments there. I'm thinking some of the questions you've asked now, I think they're going to be entirely appropriate when the trial actually finishes in April, and then we consider from the full results of the trial exactly the way to proceed if the council wishes to carry on with this type of enforcement. And if that happens, I think we're part way, we're nearly down to the end of the road. We're not quite there yet. I'll bring you back in.
All I would ask, I think that's a sensible suggestion. However, with one caveat, that officers, when renegotiate, because obviously when we get back to committee, there will be an extension of that interim contract for the service to continue, I expect. And I just want to make sure that the right revenue split, the right education, the right graduated approach, some of those things are tweaked to make sure that we are, during that extension, getting the best service for our residents.
Let me bring Mr. Brace in. I think he's anxious to say something.
No. I was just a point to raise. I know James will probably come in after me, Chairman, because he can talk about any form of extension, but and that's from obviously the procurement point of view. What I would say is the full detailed report at the end of this will be presented to members, and with clear defined issues of what went well, what didn't go well, and getting members' views on that. Of whether to pursue a full tender or not to pursue a full tender. But within that document, there will be a clear defined list of what will be in the specification. With a trial, mistakes are going to happen. Things are not going to be right. We're not satisfied with some things. They've done some things really brilliantly. We will get that into some form of specification, which we will then tender against, and then that contract will be measured against when we award that tender. So to give you reassurance, Councillor Dadds, that's the report will be defining the good, the bad and the ugly, and equally what would we want going forward that we will specify to ensure the same questions you have asked, which are absolutely valid. Should this be this? Should this be that? So that we've got a very clear mandate for the tender going forward, if we decide to pursue this as an ongoing contract.
Thank you, Mr. Brace. James Hendry.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Dadds. I think that there were 3 points that I picked up from your comments there around the proportional response and the complaints. The complaints that we meet regularly with representatives from NES around complaints, and we've got a robust lessons learned log that we're putting in place. So where there has been an upheld complaint, colleagues at NES are taking that on board. They are receptive to feedback that we get, and they have adjusted and adapted their processes where we have received complaints which have been upheld. So that has been, reassuring from our point of view as well. In relation to the profit share element, there is a table which does show the revenue return to the council, which was £21,221.50 to the end of December from the trial so far. And I think that
what they have, that's what I was saying.
That's the share that comes to us it's on a 90-10 split in their favour as per the terms of the and the final point was around the fly tipping. What does count as fly tipping? What doesn't count as fly tipping? And I think the fixed penalty notice for fly tipping isn't a prosecution for fly tipping under the Environmental Protection Act. It is for the unauthorised deposit of waste, and that is something that on the previous item Councillor Harrison had suggested that the Waste Member Working Group looks at the approach for education, enforcement and communication to be taken to the Waste Member Working Group. So I think that would help to get some clarity over what we consider to be certain levels of threshold for offences, where we have discretion over certain items. Some parts of that, isn't. We at the moment we say 7:30 on the day of collection only. Should it be if it's out at 7:25? Is that enforceable, or is it the day before? Is it 2 days before? And those are things where we have discretion over. So
we don't want to start a debate tonight on that, though.
No, absolutely not.
Councillor Blake.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to clarify a point, as my name was mentioned, Councillor Dadds was half right when he said that if you put it out just a little bit too far, that I would have stamped down on it. But I must stress is that I also believe, certainly even if you go back to the prior team, I believe in education, and then come down like a ton of bricks. Yeah. So I just want to make sure the education part of it was clearly in my mind all the time.
I'm going to bring Councillor Buckley in once again, then we're going to take the vote on the recommendation. Councillor Buckley.
Very briefly, Chairman, just on that issue of waste outside the curtilage of a property. And, Monday this week, London Road, Wickford, the guys, understandably, pile them all up. You could not walk past on the pavement. Whose fault's that?
Yeah, but
I accept it's what you need to do the job.
That was the weather. I hope you're not blaming the council. That was the weather. And no one went around dropping and putting FPMs on them. No, sorry. These were put out by our operatives, taken from the curtilage and put in. Yes, because they put them out. They put them out for a very brief period in a pile till the vehicle comes along, and then put them on the back of the vehicle. Are you suggesting we send a member of NES out to?
No, I'm just pointing out that if I got a ticket for having my bag just on the pavement rather than on the end of my drive, I would be quoting that those guys are putting them there. I just think it's something that you need to think about when you look at the guidance for FPNs if people are marginally outside their curtilage.
Well, hopefully one day this council will get away with the pink sacks, possibly the black sacks as well, and there'll be no piles of sacks for the refuse collectors to actually pick up and put on the back of vehicles. Right, the recommendation is the success to date of the trial of expanded enforcement services is noted. Okay, if you unmute yourselves, please, and we'll take a vote. People keep changing on my screen, I don't know why. Councillor Reid.
In favour.
I'm in favour. Councillor Dadds.
Is in favour.
Councillor Buckley.
In favour. They move round on the screen when they speak, Chairman.
Yeah, Councillor Blake.
In favour.
Councillor Ferguson.
In favour.
Thank you. That is carried unanimously. I think every time Mr. Brace turns his video off, the screen moves around for the new space is created.
I knew it'd be my fault.
Yeah, it's definitely his fault. Always.
Okay, now we go on to the electric vehicle charging points. I ask for this item to come to committee because I think it's important. And Martin Howlett is here with us. Martin, I think the report is quite brief, but it's important. And since this report has come out, somebody's come on to me to telling me there are quite a lot of recharging points over in the borough, but we, because they're put in by companies, etc. We're not aware of all of them, are we? Martin, if you unmute yourself.
Sorry, I had once. Evening, councillors. Yes, I have some statistics. We are aware of them in the fact that they are presented on ZapMap, which is the link that I did insert into the report. And indeed, ZapMap is the point of reference for the Department of Transport, who publish quarterly statistics on this matter. So they don't collect them directly themselves. They rely on ZapMap as a private entity themselves.
As I said at the briefing, Martin, no doubt you've got that ready to put up, have you?
Indeed, I will share my screen now. I do have a couple of maps just so that I can point out where our charging points are in relation to not only the towns but the other providers that are around. As I do so, I'll just give you some figures that were only published at the end of last week. So if you bear with me as I do this. So Basildon actually fares quite well, as you may expect. Hopefully you now have a map titled All Charges in the Basildon Borough. What I've done is I've highlighted the charges that we operate, and I should note specifically that in Wickford you will see that there are two lots of markers in Wickford main car park. That's because we've got a rapid and a fast charger in the south of the car park and a further rapid in the north. So that is there for your reference. Basildon, as it stands, is in the top 40% in England for provision of charging points. But when you relate that to the per 100,000 residents, we drop down into the top 60%. That's a trend that follows when we look more closely at Essex. We're actually first in Essex, supplying overall availability, not just council, but there are 48 charges of the 260 available in the county in Basildon. That puts us third by 100,000 residents. In terms of the actual types of charges, as I've referenced, there are rapid charges, which are the fastest charges. That would typically bring a car to 80% charge in half an hour. We have 6 of those out of the 88 in the county, and that puts us 6th in the county by 100,000 residents. So in total, as my report explains, through the 2 grants that we've managed to secure along with Rochford District Council, one through air quality work and the other through accessing grant monies from the Office for Low Emission Vehicles, specifically wishing to stimulate uptake of electric vehicles in the taxi fleet. We currently operate 6 rapid chargers and 2 fast chargers across the locations shown on this map here. What I'll do is I'll just show you a couple of more maps just to give you some context, and I'll be happy to take some questions. So this is zoomed out to show us in relation to the region. You will see obviously a very high concentration of electric vehicle charging points once we move into Greater London. But as you will see, there are an awful lot of charging locations marked in Basildon, again in Chelmsford, and a good number in Southend. If I bring us to Billericay, you will see that there are 3 charging locations there. They're a bit difficult to pick out because they're the blue colour or a blue and purple mix. So I've highlighted those with this red outline. We have a single rapid charger. That's a taxi charging point based in the Lake Meadows car park. That's chosen because it's co-located with the station. That was funded by the OLEV bid. And then we have to the south in Rose Lane car park, we have 2 rapid chargers serving the high street there. We move to Wickford main car park. You will see there that we have in the lower box, we actually have a rapid charger and a fast charger for general public use. We then also have a rapid charger for taxis and hackney carriages to the north. And I move on to the first installation that we had, which has been well used prior to the lockdown. This is based at Sporting Village, and that is a rapid charger and a fast charger. I am able to quickly tell you about usage. I have looked up some statistics. Despite the times that we find ourselves in, since the turn of 2021, we have still had 169 charging sessions, and that's 25 unique drivers have accessed those charging points. So there is still very good uptake of the charging infrastructure that we have to hand and installed ourselves. That's despite the times we are in. That figure on a week by week basis would be significantly higher, because actually Basildon Sporting Village facilities are the 2nd and 4th most popular charging points in what I would call ordinary times. And therefore, I think when we, hopefully at this point next year, we'd be able to report much higher usage of those points. Again, not only because of turnover in the fleet, but because of that return to normality in people's day-to-day habits. What I will say is that there is a short section on the future installations. Within that, it indicates that our Principal Energy Officer has secured 2 charging points at our Barleylands depot. They're for use by work vehicles and by staff. And he is working on the implementation of further on-street charging locations, and particularly with Essex County Council. But I understand that the emerging climate policy and action plans will be presented to this committee in due course, maybe as early as next month. And I would hope that future installations through a managed programme, you would get more detail about that in that documentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Thank you, Martin. That's very useful.
Keep the screen up for reference.
If you can unshare your screen.
Unshare, okay.
It enables me to see members then easier.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
There you go.
Thank you. Can I just ask, all the ones you've shown are public charging points?
Yes, the only within the borough there are a mix. So you will find that car showrooms now tend to be locations that show up on ZapMap. Primarily, they'd be used by that dealership, but no doubt their customers as well. We do have a good number on the Dunton campus operated by Ford. They have a number serving their car parks. They would not be public access. They would be available to visitors, but not to general public. But all those operated by us are either general public use, which are dominant, or taxi and hackney carriage drivers.
You mentioned the climate report which is coming to this committee. It's a good opportunity to, I should have said this on the item on the waste strategy probably as well. It's a good opportunity to remind all members, there's an all-member webinar on that on the 1st of March, which covers, is quite wide-ranging, and that is going to be important, the way this council goes forward in relation to how we deal with climate, decarboning, etc., etc. So that's an important thing, but this is part of it as well. Any questions for Martin? Malcolm. Buckley.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. A few observations. Yeah, and I'll proclaim a degree of ignorance on the functioning of electric vehicles. I personally have reservations over them because of the range and the inconvenience of recharging them on a long journey. So some public charging points like these are vital, not just here, but at motorway service stations and the like, which is not our realm. There are many businesses that have got charging points. In the days when I worked, quite often I would go to places and some of the vehicles would be electric. So that is something which is available, but it's not available to the general public, which is the concern. And I'd just like to ask a couple of points. One is on the issue of flat dwellers, because I don't agree with the leader's presumption that you won't have a car just because you live in the flat. But obviously you don't have the ability to have home charging. So are we thinking about that when we look at the plans for, particularly for Basildon? So that's point one. Second point, there are, I understand, I think 3 different types of charger, and I did look up ZapMap on my other screen while the presentation was going on. And I knew that there were fast and rapid chargers. There is also a slow charger, apparently, though why you might want to go to that, I'm not so sure. So my understanding is that the connectors or adapters, whatever you choose to call them, are not compatible, which is the same as we used to have on electric vehicles at work, so that you couldn't put the wrong voltage or the wrong charge rate onto the wrong machine. So if I'm correct on that, is there any mechanism for what I would term an adapter? Like you go abroad, they got funny plugs in other countries. You want to charge up your phone, you have an adapter for it. And particularly taking into account the announcements by Ford and Jaguar Land Rover over the last few days, is there anything being done to persuade the manufacturers of those electric vehicles that actually what they need to do is not just to have a rapid or a fast charging facility, but to have a facility on there where you could use whichever charger is more appropriate at the time? And I say that my knowledge of industrial vehicles is that you could do a rapid charge on a battery and it would not last as long as a trickle charge over several hours. I presume the same principle applies to a car battery, but I don't know if the officer can respond to that or not. Understand if you can't.
I'll cover one of the points you made, Malcolm. It's on the last part on page 42. It refers to residential areas where there's no way of households getting charging points within their house. So that is the on-street residential charging, which we're talking to the county council. As I understand it, they were working there were. I assume there'll probably be fairly slow chargers off of the lighting columns within certain residential areas. But I don't want to get into a debate about how you plug in. This is a debate about, we're talking about the supply across the borough of electric vehicle charging points. I'm not going to get into a debate what plug you put in. All I say on that, you just be careful, exactly the same as you would be, you didn't put diesel into your petrol car and vice versa. Martin, do you wish to respond? I don't want to get into a debate on the type of plugs that go into.
No, I understand, Councillor. No, thank you. Yes, I'm happy to answer the questions. Yes, for homes that don't have drives, garages, flats or share communal parking, yes, that is what our principal energy officer is looking at. Is what has the term on-street residential charge points, but it has quite a liberal interpretation in terms of communal parking can apply, I think, to other car parking areas, as well as just on street. In terms of charging, yes, nomenclature for that got ahead of itself very early on. So what you've referred to as a slow charge is a trickle charge. In in essence, that is your overnight charge when you're on your drive at home, just a slow feed to not draw too much power down at one time. There are effectively two types of fast charger. We have 7 kilowatt or 22 kilowatt. The fast chargers that I'm referring to that we have put in both in Basildon and Rochford are the faster type of fast charger, the 22 kilowatt. And then we do have rapids, which are 43 kilowatt hour charging. What they'll call the next one and how fast that will be, I don't know. Supersonic, but we will wait and see. There's only so much capacity within the grid, and of course that will ultimately dictate availability of points and what type of chargers can be there. In terms of adapters, there is some variation. There isn't a universal adapter for all vehicles, but the chargers, particularly the Rapid, there is an AC and a DC option on there. So they are as general as possible at this time. Of course, you will notice if you go to certain motorway stations and other locations, you will have Tesla charging points and you will have whatever that other private company will be. But Tesla, as a car manufacturer, tend to supply their own chargers for their own vehicles. And I understand what you're alluding to. Yes, that is a potential issue for certain owners in certain areas, depending which infrastructure comes into play. As for your final question, you're quite right. I don't know. I'm afraid I don't know about the adapters and other options on the market.
Okay. Thank you very much, Martin. Well, the report is just for noting, so I think it's noted, and obviously sometime, I think probably in the very near future, we will get further updates for EV charging across the borough, because I think it's going to progress, as we all know. Thank you, Martin. That's very much appreciated. Thank you. Right, if we now move on then to item 10, unless anybody needs a comfort break. Oh, Malcolm asked last time around this time. No? No, we carry on. Right, okay. Changing places and inclusive play funding. An opportunity has arisen with the county, in conjunction with the County Council, for funding to supply a changing places facility and inclusive play space. And Wat Tyler is the perfect choice for it. If we secure the funding, there's the full details there. Excellent report. I don't know, Mr. Taylor, do you wish to run through this? I'm assuming everybody's read this, because I think it's a really good opportunity, and it's good to work with the County Council on this. And in effect, all we have to do is find the additional £100,000, which I think we can do within the play review strategy funding. Mr. Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I mean, I think you've hit the basic nail on the head there. This is positive work. We've been having conversations with the County Council for some period of time over this. I'm sure everyone on the call will know that changing places facilities are extremely important for some of our most vulnerable residents and their families, and help break down, I guess, that greater risk of isolation, whereby there's not the facilities that you can have confidence in being able to kind of use the facilities in a way that we would all expect, and ensure that there's dignity. And there's sure there's many people have heard this, and there's some terrible stories out there about the indignity people are put into with regards to having to. For people to have to be changed on the floor of toilets and the like, and it's clearly not a place we want to be. Wat Tyler is already home to a park which is used extensively by the whole community. We're very pleased and proud that BOSP, Better Opportunities for Special People, are based there. So we have a lot of conversations with that wonderful local charity, and there's something that's fully supportive of this. So obviously the opportunity here is to, I guess, increase our inclusive play in the park, which we already have, but this would expand and enhance that, and certainly improve it, and provide that changing places facility. all for which is probably about a £250,000 project, but we'd be able to bring in the majority of that from our county colleagues if we can secure 100,000 of that ourselves. Now, of course, the proposal that officers are working through at the moment is for play investment through the play review, which is coming to this committee next month. So I totally understand that today really is about making a decision on but that is based on the proviso that the funding that the play review is passed next month, and that the funding is actually in the budget when the budget goes also. So there are some caveats and provisos, but I think it's important that we wanted to bring this wider conversation to the committee. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much. Okay, members, I think it's an exciting opportunity. I've got to thank the County Council for the work that's been going on between us to get to this stage. I'm hopeful the committee will agree when the play review comes to the next committee, and the budget, the funding is there for that. And then we can get this really, really good facility into Wat Tyler Park, and the play area become more inclusive with the £100,000 we should be able to put towards it. I should also add, and Mr. Taylor didn't, there may also be an opportunity which doesn't come under this committee, for another changing places facility in Basildon Town Centre. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Taylor. I hope that one hasn't died a death.
No, I'm not so directly involved in that myself, but no, that's exactly my understanding too. But I'll happily pick that up with colleagues.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Daggs.
Thank you. I clearly believe in inclusive play. Now, whether this location, and I'm pleased for you to say, Mr. Chairman, there might be consideration for another location in the town centre. Has any thoughts been given to whether the Langdon Community Centre could be used as a location? Because obviously it's quite a big site. There is lots of space, and obviously at the moment there's a lot of discussion around, and I think on the work programme, which I wasn't able to speak on, going forward, we're going to be looking at the Langdon Community Centre, and whether one of these sort of 100,000 invested, county matching the funding, can go into the Langdon Centre. Of course, I've heard it on a good source that the Langdon Centre is going to be demolished within a few weeks. Now, if that is the case, then obviously we obviously can't have this item, can't have this going into the Langdon Centre because it won't be there. But clearly, I'm wondering whether confirmation can be made, whether this could be considered, not this one in particular, if there's another one, the location where the Langdon Community Centre could be considered, but obviously maybe if confirmation is confirmed that it is, our steps are being taken to demolish that centre, then clearly that will end the discussion there. So whilst I'm a believer of the inclusive play and support that, has the Langdon Community Centre been seen as earmarked as a possibility, given the funding that it could go into that building?
Thank you, Councillor Daggs. Let me just clarify. The changing places is separate from the inclusive play. There's two separate funds, as I understand it. The changing places is a facility which can be provided, and as I understand it, this is from this year's money from the County Council, and they may well be in their budget, including other needs for it in their budget for continuing. The inclusive play is a separate one from which it's attached to the changing places, and it's from that we make the contribution. We don't make a contribution to the changing places, as I understand it. I think Mr. Taylor's nodding agreement.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The conversation with the County Council and the offer, in essence, is that they want to fund both enhances inclusive play, putting 100k into that, with the idea that all of the local authorities across the Essex County Council footprint mirror that. So 200k is an investment, but and a bog off agreement, you also get 100k into the change in place as well. So they are linked. So it's where there is play and the facilities themselves. Now I must say that the county. The county particularly spoke to us about what Tyler, and that was based on feedback I think that they'd been getting with regards to the families that normally use their services. So that's the reason particularly for that being the location.
Yeah.
And what about the next location of Langdon? And is it going to be demolished?
No,
Seems like the head of culture.
we're not talking about Langdon
Not
Community
the director
Centre.
of community and environment.
Councillor Dad,
Can we possibly look when you're talking? No, you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, about another location in Basildon Town Centre, and I'm just asking. The officers will know if it's being demolished. Just tell us. If it's not, then it's not. And if there's another funding coming up for Basildon Town Centre, has Langdon Community Centre been considered? That's what I'm asking. It's a fair question.
well, let me answer that question. Langdon Community Centre is not on the agenda tonight. I have no knowledge of any plans whatsoever for Langdon Community Centre to be demolished. So don't start spreading what I would call gossip, because there are no such plans as far as I'm concerned. On the question of changing places, the funding will come from the county council. If the county council have more to give and to offer, once again to Basildon Council, I'm sure we would look at sites, perhaps in Langdon, perhaps in Billericay, perhaps in Wickford, where we could put these facilities. But that will be up to the county council if they continue this funding in their new budget. I hope they will, because if they do, there's more opportunities. Okay, anyone else?
Mr. Brace was going to add on to that.
Mr. Brace can add what he wants. Yes, I don't stop Mr. Brace from speaking.
Just in terms of the inclusive play, obviously outdoor inclusive play, which is then coupled with effectively the changing places to encourage people to use the park and services. And on your other point, Councillor Dads, there are no instructions, there are no jobs been raised in any way, shape or form to demolish Langdon Community Centre. That I can confirm. And
are there no future plans for that, for the immediate future, for the next couple of months?
The report will be brought to members in March detailing the way forward, but I can confirm we have not made any steps or been ordered or asked or
so the building will stay at least until March. It will stay until March at least.
This committee,
no steps have been made to demolish the building at all.
March.
No, not that
at all.
In March, this committee will look at Langdon Community Centre.
Thank you. That's all I wanted to ask earlier on, is that we will still have a community centre standing in March, so that we're not discussing a piece of flat land. We'll have an opportunity to discuss an actual building that's still standing. That's what I want to have assurance. That's all I want to have assurance.
I'll say this, Councillor Dads. If the Langdon Community Centre wasn't still standing on March the 10th, I wouldn't be chairing this committee. Okay?
Well, thank you for that.
Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'm glad to hear your praise for the County Council, and one or two other members could also help their case by recognising the support that County gives to Basildon. One or two don't think it gets anything, but that's... on to the point of this, I think these are an important facility, and I think no problems at all with it going to Tyler. But I also think that we ought to be pressing the case for the town centre, because at the end of the day, where do most people in the borough go? Forget the pandemic, but Basildon Town Centre is probably the busiest locality in normal days. So it is right that we get something like that. Essex sets its budget next week, so I can't disclose to you what it will contain, as I'm sure you're aware. But it will certainly be something I will be looking for, and hopefully it won't just be in Basildon, but other places as well do need this type of facility. we've all used, when kids were young, public toilets to change nappies and things like that. I appreciate this is for adults or older people rather than babies, but we've seen the difficulties that brought forward. So I think if one can imagine having to look after an adult with disabilities, then somewhere like this is absolutely essential for that person's health and hygiene. So hopefully this won't be the last time we talk about this topic.
Totally agree. Just wish to come in? No, the recommendations are quite clear. On one, authorises the funding opportunity for a changing places facility and inclusive play space at Wat Tyler Country Park to be explored further in order to seek to secure funding to enable works to be undertaken during 2021-22, authorises the investment for the play area at Wat Tyler Country Park to take place during year 1 of the proposed 10-year play review programme, subject to the approval of capital funding for this programme. Okay, if you'll unmute yourselves, we'll take the vote on that particular one. Councillor Ferguson.
In favour.
Councillor Reid.
In favour.
Councillor Dadds.
In favour.
Councillor Blake.
In favour.
Councillor Buckley.
For.
And myself in favour. Right, thank you very much, sir. Much appreciated. Right, item 11, the Whitford Memorial trees. Now, just get to the right pages in a moment. At this point in time, the recommendation is to note the report and for us to seek any clarifications as necessary. I want it as an open thing at the moment because I was hoping that by tonight we'll get enough information from the insurers, etc. Everyone who's looked at it, see if we can come to an actual decision. Councillor Dadds, I'll bring you in, but before we're bring Mr. Reynolds in to talk about it first of all, really. Is it a point of order or a?
Sorry.
Yeah, Councillor Dadds.
Yes. Can I just have a? Can I comment on this report?
Well, can you? Yeah, you can. But I'd rather hear. It may be an update from Mr. Reynolds first.
Well, okay, I'm happy for that as long as you call me in afterwards. But yes. I'm a bit concerned that we've not had further action to what we considered last time. But anyway, maybe I hear what the officer has to say. Yeah. And if you could call me
Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you,
Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Chairman. So yes, we had the verbal update on the trees in Whitford Memorial Park at the previous committee meeting last month. And this is an update report from there. Now, the two aspects which were to be addressed in this report was if the trees were to be retained, what would be the effect from a structural perspective and what would be the effects from an insurance perspective. So those were the two aspects of the report that we've looked at. Additionally, a recommendation from the committee last time was that a temporary tree preservation should be placed on the three viable memorial trees closest to the building. On page 56, I've put a bit of the history there, a bit of the background of what has happened to get us to this particular point. So in July 2018, there was a condition survey of the community centre itself. And it was noted in that report that there was damage to the building. Subsequently, there was a further report commissioned to look at the damage which had been sustained, and that concluded that the damage had been caused by clay shrinkage because of the presence of the trees which we discussed at the last meeting. Now you can see the plan there, T1, T2, T3 and T4. Those were the 4 trees which were recommended for removal. And as we discussed at last meeting, T3 is an ash tree which has fungal decay, and it is recommended that is removed because of the safety aspect of that particular tree. Further to the structural engineers making reports, an arboricultural report was commissioned by the loss adjusters, and that report concluded that the T1 and T2 should be removed. T3, yes, that should be removed, but not as part and parcel of the structural damage. And T4 be maintained at its current size. Now, what we've written there is that recommendation is slightly at odds with what the structural engineers report says, and that is an issue which regrettably I can't report back on, as we haven't received assurances from either the loss adjuster or the insurers themselves as to the questions we posed. The council did employ a structural engineer to give us a second opinion on this, and they did recommend, as an alternative to removing the trees, installing a root barrier, which we discussed at last meeting. However, they didn't substantiate in any detail or quantify the root barrier itself. And the opinion is that the trees are too close to the building for root trenching, and therefore a root barrier installed could destabilize the trees. And secondly, root barriers themselves aren't that successful in the long term. I've written there about the insurance aspect and the three questions that we posed to the insurers and the loss adjusters, and regrettably, and we did check today, another chase up if we can get some more detail from them about their views on what we have posed. But as I've said, we didn't get an update from them, and I can't report back to the committee on those questions that we have posed. As regards the temporary tree preservation order, as with all tree preservation orders, there has to be an assessment of the tree. I know there's been assessment of the trees from a structural perspective, but there has to be what's called a tempo, which is a tree evaluation model for preservation orders. That has to be undertaken. That has been done, as noted in the report, and that is with planners at the moment. And the likelihood is that there will be a group order served on those trees, T1, T2 and T4. That will be forthcoming. The options I've given there is what was in the original report: to remove the 4 trees, monitor for soil stability, and undertake structural repairs to the buildings as recommended by the loss adjuster itself. On page 56, we've written about the financial implications of both tree retention and tree removal. If the recommendation was to keep the trees, there is an estimated cost of about £47,000, which would have to be borne by the council. If the trees were removed, it's likely the insurance policy would pay for the £10,000 repairs, which would leave the council obviously with a lesser budget to find. So that's a brief run through the report, and back to the chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Before I bring anyone else in, let me say this, and I need to ask a couple of questions first of all. On insurance of the building, can we self-insure the building? First question, if anyone could answer for me, please.
We could, yes.
We could self-insure the building. So
yes.
if, because my view at the moment is, I've mentioned this today, is quite clear. At this point in time, I'm looking to say we take down the ash tree, we can take down the offending, which is what isn't one of the memorial trees, it's the willow, T6. T3, the ash tree, would have to come down. I understand discussions have taken place with Steve Newman of the War Memorial Committee, and agreement has been reached with him as the type of tree to replace it, a Scots pine, which is related in effect to the soldier who that tree was put there memorial to. It means that the other three trees, if we, because at this point in time, my view is that we retain them, we repair the building, we do the underpinning, and we monitor it. And if that facility is then taken out of our insurance grouping, so it's self-insured, That then raises a further question, and I'm looking to officers now to give some answers on if it's self-insured, how do we actually fund that self-insurance? Do we self-insure any other facilities, or are there any other facilities where there may well be problems coming up we should self-insure? Mr. Brace, I'm sorry about that.
Well, thank you. You could have let me know about that one earlier. Certainly, we do have an insurance pool. There is money in there. Certainly, we've been focused on very much what can we do to the building. Everybody in the room here we need to save the trees, but equally we also need to find a way to keep the building because we have tenants in it. So we're looking at been focusing on what we can do that makes the building safe and retains the trees. The conversation around the insurance is what impact does that have on our insurance, which as we have been chasing, and I can assure you, as have our insurance section, chasing for a response. I have to say they're never particularly quick on these things. So we may be forced into a position where we make a decision on what we're going to do in terms of the insurance of that building. So yes, we can self-insure. I'm not aware of any other buildings that are in have an issue such as this. And also we have to measure our insurance policy. If there is an impact on this building and we can reinsure it, the impact of that will be felt across all of our buildings insured. So the insurance team are working on what those impacts potentially could be, because we wouldn't want to see the insurance costs for all community centres going up on the basis of one that has an issue. So we're trying to work that through, and I take Councillor Dads's point. It's taken us a bit of time to get to this, but there are a lot of issues we're having to consider. But ultimately, they're our trees. We will not be taking them down, and that decision around what we're going to do, we will definitely have to have here for the 10th of March, because we're very cognizant of the timing that we need to take to undertake any form of work in that area. And certainly our ultimate aim is to ensure those trees remain. We will probably though start work on the ash, because that would make sense, and the willow, to ensure certainly the ash is safe. But the other three, so we would want to retain. So by the 10th of March, by that meeting, we will have an answer either way. Take your point around whether the insurance company are going to accept what we're going to do and it's fine, or ultimately we'll have to look at the other option of self-insurance.
Okay, so
that decision, Section 151. So Section 151 will make a decision around self-insurance.
Okay, so therefore I'd like to make a recommendation to the committee that at this point in time, we ask the officers to come forward for the March meeting on the proposal to retain the trees, carry out the repairs, the underpinning and monitoring, and the cost of that, yep. and insurance issues. I'm trying to word this very carefully, and I'm no doubt the members agree. We'll make sure that if you understand where I'm going to, we'll come to some form of agreement on the wording. And officers come back in March with an update on the insurance position, and also financing, if necessary, of the 47,500 or less than £5,000, which is already there from the VE day and VJ day.
But are you going to call me to speak? I did indicate earlier to speak.
Yes, I did say after I spoke to Council, Mr. Brace, and I'm now trying to make a recommendation, which I think is quite clear. But I'll bring you in. I just want to ask Mr. Brace first of all if that is a recommendation, which is something we can achieve.
Yeah, well, we will need to achieve it by the 10th of March. Yes.
Yeah.
And I'll second that, but I want to speak first.
Yeah.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman, because I'm passionate about these things wherever it is in the borough, because I believe we're a custodian of memorials, and we know. I mean, I went and visited after the last committee meeting, because I such an important decision. I wanted to have a look at the setting and the trees myself, because I hadn't been there before. And you've got Mr. Rawlings, you've got Mr. Pratt from the RAF, Mr. Prim's RAF. These trees are there for servicemen that gave their lives, 30, 21, 20. And we've even got on the sign that they are there for Wickford servicemen who sacrificed their life during World War II. Heroism, courage, selflessness could be remembered and preserved for the future generations. And we've made it quite clear that we should not, I think we should not remove these trees whatsoever, because the principle that I come to this is that there's nothing wrong with the trees except from the ash, although I looked at the ash today and I've got a photograph of it. It looks solid. I'm not a tree expert, so I might ask if we can just clarify where we are with that, because when I looked at the ash today, it looks absolutely, I can't see anything physically outward appearance, but obviously the tree expert will know. So what I would say is that the issue is not the trees, the issue is the building. If, Mr. Chairman, someone was coming to us of a private landowner saying, I've got a building and I've got a problem with underpinning or a problem with its stability, what would we be saying to them? Particularly when these trees were put in place before, I believe, before this building was even built. So I don't know when this building was built, but I assume it was built after the trees were planted. So the reality of it is that why wasn't that taken into account at the time? And I think the barrier and the roots, the barrier for the tree roots should be something that is explored. I have it in my own garden, that I had a garden wall erected all the way around, it's a substantial wall, but I had to have barriers put in to protect the tree, and the footings went down by about 2 meters. It goes all the way around. It's about 40,000 bricks, but they preserved and protected the tree and trees in my garden. So there are ways of doing works, structural works and protection of trees, as well as the building. So I think you're right, we need to look at that, but at all costs, in my view, these trees must be maintained. That's my position. I will support you and your recommendation. Last thing that I will comment on, that I do have criticism, there might be some explanation from officers, and I hope you don't mind, Mr. Bray. So I'm very complimentary of you always, and I know you work very hard, but I am a bit surprised that the temporary tree preservation orders have not been put in place. Tree preservation orders are the paperwork for that is on the basis that they're done urgently, so that stops people removing trees. I'm not suggesting that anyone in the council would remove them, but it's now been almost a month. And the temporary tree preservation order, which is a fairly straightforward process to serve on ourselves, should have been done and maintained in the public register, and that's not been done. And we as a committee voted for that, for those orders to be put in place, and they have not been put in place. And I'd like an explanation of why that's not been done and when will it be done, please, because that decision hasn't been overturned by this committee. It's a decision made by us, and I would like to know when it's going to be put into place, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak.
I'll bring Councillor Buckley in and Councillor Blake in first. Councillor Buckley first.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with your recommendation. We have to remove the ash tree for safety. I don't know enough about trees to challenge whether the disease is sufficient to render it dangerous at the moment, so I rely on our specialists for that. I think there's a number of things here, and I think all of us want to see those trees preserved, but my point is that it's not actually trees we're preserving, they are war memorials, and that's the difference. Had they been just ordinary trees, I may have taken a slightly different view on it. In terms of the insurance, in fact, prior to the last meeting, I did actually just put it up on the other screen, get the definitions for insurance for the council. this, as I understand it, is deemed to be a commercial property because it's leased to a third party, which should be insured by that third party. So I don't see why that third party is not taking the responsibility for it or through their insurers. We do self-insure a lot of property, and I can recall years ago when we reviewed it under my leadership. We review all of our housing stock for it. We insure all of our own housing stock, for example. So it's not unusual to self-insure if you're on the scale of a local authority. But we do actually cover ourselves for claims over 25,000 in each case. But subsidence, for whatever reason, is excluded from all of them. Quite why, I'm not sure, but that's where we are. On the matter of the trees, Councillor Dad's mentioned the names of those who were lost during the wars there. And he mentioned an by the name of Pratt. And I think you know his sister, or did know his sister, as I did, which was Gwen Jones, who was a long-standing councillor many years ago. And Mr. Pratt is actually, or was, her brother. And I would, for that reason alone, be especially sad if that's the tree that has to be removed. And I don't know whether which of the trees relates to Fine Officer Pratt. Like Councillor Dad's, I expected the TPOs to be on by now, because TPOs are, as you know from other circumstances, Chairman, they can be put on by the planners pretty much instantly. So I'm disappointed that they're not in place. But overall, the recommendation you're making, I think, is the right one. I'm not unduly fussed by the willow tree. Willows are renowned for having damaging roots along with poplar trees. So don't go and plant one in your garden would be my advice. But overall, it's the right recommendation. Let's keep the 3 trees we can. Whether it's a Scots pine or anything else that replaces the ash, I'm not fussed about. But let's get something back in there as soon as we can. And I do appreciate that there are times of the year when that has to happen. The solution for the building, yeah, we underpin it. And whilst I hear the risks that Mr. Reynolds put forward there, underpinning and root barriers happens a lot in domestic properties where there are trees close by and the properties do survive. Yes, you pay a premium on the insurance to cover subsidence because it's moved once. But if the job's done properly by an accredited firm that specialises in that, you'll get a warranty on the underpinning anyway. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Councillor Blake.
Yeah, just regarding the criticism of officers regarding the 2 preservation orders. Maybe I misunderstood it, but I thought Hugh Reynolds gave an explanation as to where we were on that and how far down the road we were, and the fact that it was imminent to happen at any time. So I think we've already had an explanation on that, unless I misheard that. I don't know if Hugh wants to clarify whether that I have got that exactly right.
We'll come to that, because I think if the recommendation is carried, which is basically that officers report back in March on how we, in order to retain the 3 memorial trees in question, and come back to us on the financing of the 47,500 and how we deal with the insurance. I mean, we need to word that. I'm not going to sit and write all that down at the moment. If Mr. Brace and Julie are clear on the indications. Paul?
Yep, that's fine.
If that's okay, Councillor Dadds has seconded it. Here on the tree preservation orders, if we do this, the tree preservation order on these 3 trees won't be needed anyway. So I don't want to go around chasing people now to do tree preservation orders on trees which we want to save.
Well, you'll have to put that to the committee to change its decision. We made a decision to put it in. That decision has to be implemented.
Yes, it can still be implemented. Yes, the next meeting, we can decide if once we've agreed, which we will do in March, on the recommendation to keep the trees and how we finance it, the tree, then we can say we rescind that decision on the tree preservation orders because the trees are going to be retained. I think it's quite simple. Okay, we'll take the vote then. I'll be voting in favour. I'm assuming Councillor Dadds, who seconded it, will be voting in favour. Thank you, David. Councillor Buckley.
In favour.
Councillor Blake.
In favour.
Councillor Ferguson.
In favour.
And Councillor Reid.
In favour.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, the next item is the grounds maintenance update. I asked for a report on this. I wanted to see what we did on grounds maintenance, and I think the report is quite brief, but there's some interesting points in it. One of the interesting points is the contributions made by the HRA of income received. The HRA 304,000, the County Council 116,200. The HRA covers the cost of the service provided. However, the ECC does not. And that is why the recommendation I wish to move tonight is that the committee notes the report and instructs the Director of Communities and Community and Environment to recover the £250,000 deficit from the County Council of their contribution for highways grounds maintenance within the borough. And two, that the £250,000 recovered to be allocated to the Council's tree strategy. Have I got a seconder? Councillor Ferguson. Do you wish to speak now or?
Happy to second and allow officers to come back.
Councillor Dadds.
Perhaps you could explain, or someone could just explain the thought process behind instructing officers to go and recover the sum that we say is the true cost of the service. Do we obviously we can't just go and recover money from, if it's subject to a contract and there's a contract that says they have to pay that, then we obviously render the invoice or whatever it is for local government for that service, and they pay us if it's subject to contract. Can we clarify, is the sum that you're asking officers to go to recoverable over on a contract, or is it that you're asking officers to go back as of past consideration for works that we've done to try to recover the cost of doing work that we've not charged for? Because that is what I just perhaps want to understand. Is it something that we are under contract and should be able to recover, or is it something that we should be talking to county and saying this is the cost, true cost, and renegotiating a contract for that service, or or county say, well, actually we're only going to pay you the 116. We say no, we don't want that, and then they say, okay, we'll go and put that to someone else, and then suddenly our budget is 116 light, and then county go and get someone else to cut it. I just want to understand.
Our budget wouldn't be 116 light, would it?
No, but what it is, the point I'm making, look, I want to make sure for our residents to recover the cost, like the trolleys, like other things, recover the costs of a service. I don't like paying county double. We pay them for the council tax. We don't want to pay them double, and suddenly we are paying more than we should. We should get our fair share. However, on your proposal to go and instruct officers, you're asking me to vote. I'm saying, is it subject to contract? Is it renegotiation? And what are we actually saying about if the county say, no, we don't want to do that? What is the implication? Can they go and do that service themselves? They might be able to do it cheaper They might be able to find someone else to do it cheaper. I don't know, or the same cost, or
Okay.
marginally. It could be marginally different, not 250,000. So I just want to understand it, because if we're saying, because what I don't want here later on is that, well, there's 250,000 they won't give us. That's 250,000 that was not in our stream, our other pot. Well, at the moment, it's not real money if it's not subject to a contract. So I just want to understand that before we discuss it further.
Mr. Reynolds.
Yes, first point, there is no contractual arrangement between ourselves and County Council on that particular point. Historically, reorganisation in 1974, when we took on the agency agreement from County to maintain the highways as part of the Highways Agency, that continued to 2005. Post 2005, when County took the agency agreement back, there was no contractual agreement produced at that time. The monies which were allotted, the 116,000, I think I've written in the report, is based on 1.5 cuts per year, which is County's standard for cutting grass on their verges. The council took the option to top it up to 10 cuts. So it doesn't exactly answer your question, Councillor Dadds, but that's as I understand the position to be.
Can I come back, Councillor Harrison?
Yes, certainly.
Well, Mr. Reynolds, I say that I'm almost like, where are we going with this? I want to be realistic. If there is no contractual agreement and an entitlement to recover in contract, you know, unless there's been some promissory estoppel, i.e. a promise to pay, then there is no way of us giving you instruction to go and get 250,000 from County. It's past consideration. We've already done the work. Contractually, we can't go and ask for money for works that we never contracted into. I offer acceptance consideration. Past consideration will never, in a matter of law, we can't recover. We might be able to negotiate, but why would they? Going forward, I can understand. Going forward, put an agreement in place and try to secure the real cost of doing the service, or County put it to someone else. But Mr. Councillor Harrison, you know, your recommendation.
Yeah, Councillor Dadds, if I can interrupt you, I'm sorry for interrupting you.
Sorry.
You've made a very valid point, but I'm not a legal expert, and I'm listening to you and thinking that was a silly recommendation.
No, it's not silly. It's just.
Oh, it is, because what the recommendation should be, instructing officers to talk to the county council, not to recover, but to, in effect, there would be a saving to us of 250k in that gap. But in future, we talk to them and we say, if you want the 10 cuts, this is the cost of the 10 cuts.
I think what we're trying to achieve, and if I can add on to it, I think what we're doing is going back to County and saying, can you perhaps compensate us for the extra work we've been doing last year? They may say no. However, goodwill between us, maybe we might get something. Going forward, if you want us to provide 1.5 cuts, we will do that. But if you want us to do 10 cuts, renegotiate, get a contract in place so that we know where we stand and we can recover. At the end of the day, there's no, you know, things happen like this, but we need to just maybe re-establish the relationship to understand what the offer is, what the service is, and try to recover fair consideration for the work done. That's what you want, and that's what we all want, I think.
That's the best speech.
And I would support
the best speech you've made tonight. I agree with you wholeheartedly. So
I would have made a better one had you called me on the first one, which you didn't ask me for.
No.
I have got a sense.
You're joking now. You're joking now. No, I think it's a valid point you've made. But I think the whole thing was, and I looked at this, and I think Mr. Reynolds has explained it. I thought he's done very well in explaining that. But it's almost like, I hate to use the terms, it's gone on and on and on as an old Spanish custom. we've always done it, so let's carry on doing it. And do we get this amount from them, and we just carry on doing the 10 cuts? And I think my view is that's got to change, and it's how we go about the best way of changing it. I think tonight I wanted to highlight what was happening, and so that we can seek, and I think you've made a very good representation as how to seek from the county some refund for what we've done for the past year, not the previous 20 years, but the past year, because it's been going on for a long, long while, and to agree from the next round that they either fund the cost the same as the HRA does, or we reduce the number of cuts, but as you said, they do it by somebody else.
Yeah, it's a complicated a relationship we have, county, because at 1 minute we're just getting 100,000 for a play area, and we get money for libraries sometimes, and it's a balancing. So if we demand some money here, we may lose there. It's complicated because ultimately, like us, we only have so much money, so does county. Yeah. But I think that there should be a proper contract in place so that we understand and the residents are getting value for money for the services that we're providing on behalf of another authority. And I think that's right. Yeah,
no, you're quite right, David, because also I've had discussions with officers on this. It's all the question of how we work with their trees, which are on their land, which we do work on. Mr. Brace can adequately explain this because he explained it to me, and it's something that's going on for some considerable time.
Yeah, we maintain the highway trees, and we get a set sum per year. And when that's gone, it's gone. And then if there is extra work which Hugh's identified, then he'll ask county for additional money. But it's not maintaining the trees per se. It's just repairing or where there's something that's happened. So we've been trying for some time to get a better footing. So it would be very useful to sort this old Spanish custom, as Councillor Harrison has said, of we've got nothing in place that's kind of telling us what both our responsibilities are and what we're both seeking from the contract. So it's just where it's always been a county and Basildon Council agreement that we've never really got down in writing, and Hugh has tried on numerous occasions, and I'm more than happy to try again.
Okay, so I think the best way forward now, I take that amendment off, that recommendation off the line. I think the best way forward is to ask officers to talk to the county council and to come to some formal arrangement with the county council, and which, in other words, perhaps a memorandum of understanding initially, to come back to this committee on a basis for how we deal with either trees, all the things you've mentioned, Mr. Brace has mentioned, the grass cutting, the highways, the maintenance, which we do, and I think there should be some formal agreement. There hasn't been one for a long, long time, and I think it needs to be there. Is everyone, Malcolm, as a county councillor?
Thank you, Chairman. The situation actually is quite simple. As you say, it goes back to the days prior to Highways Agency actually coming to Basildon. The county council has always paid for 1.5 cuts. The 1.5 cuts is one complete cut and cuts of sight lines. That's basically what the money is for. And it's the same across the entire county. Many authorities, Basildon specifically, choose to enhance that, and therefore it is their choice. That's why the bill comes out as it does. Now, by all means, go and talk to county officers, but I suspect as it's a county-wide service level that's maintained, that probably won't change. But you never know your luck. Kevin Bentley might feel generous. It's usually good for us anyway. So I think, by all means ask, but I wouldn't be too optimistic is the truth of it. And if you like, you can draw the parallel with park night lighting. Many of the boroughs in the county do not pay the extra and do not have the lights on. Basildon chooses to do so. So it is something where local authorities have got an option. I only mentioned that because you actually raised it at the start, but I did actually have a question on the actual paper itself, and that's actually regarding the contract itself. We let the contract in 2016 to Iverdi, is that how you pronounce it, for 7 years with the possibility of a 7-year extension. And one constant criticism I've made of county is that we come up to these dates where you can consider an extension or you can consider going back to the market, and we find out about it too late. We've actually got a couple of years. If you go to retender, take a large portion of that time to be able to do the job properly, as I'm sure the officers will confirm. I have no particular complaints about the work that's being done, so I'll put that where it is. But I do think, given the timing, we ought to be saying through this committee that probably in 6 months' time, we ought to be looking at, do we want to extend? Do we want to retender? Do we want to change the terms of it? Because, yeah, say if Kevin Bentley is very generous, maybe it's appropriate to change the terms of it. So it's really highlighting the issue of potential extension or renewal of the contract, because we're getting close to the window where that needs to start.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Okay. Anybody? Hugh? Ms Reynolds?
I don't know if you wanted me to answer Councillor Buckley's point.
Please.
So yes, we have discussed that. We need to make a decision August of next year about whether there will be an extension or we go out to procurement and re-tender the contract. So although 2017 doesn't seem that far away, suddenly, you know, this 7 years is galloping away, and before you know it, we'll be having to make that decision. So it's August of next year when we'll have to start thinking about making these decisions on that particular point. Yeah.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you. Okay. So is everyone happy with asking officers to talk to the County Council to formalise the arrangements for grounds maintenance of the highway or the highways land and tree? It wasn't maintenance, was it, Mr. Brace?
Yeah, it's doing tree works, emergency tree works.
Right.
Yeah.
Is everyone happy with that?
Yes.
Okay. If everyone's happy with that, we'll take a vote. Councillor Dadds?
Yes. Favour.
Councillor Buckley?
Yeah, in favour, Chairman.
Councillor Blake?
In favour.
Councillor Ferguson?
In favour.
Councillor Reid?
Favour.
Myself in favour. Thank you very much. Thank you for your help, Councillor Dadds. Right, item 13 is the COVID-19 impact assessment. I'm not sure there's much to report, is there, Mr. Brace?
No, I've just got a few points to raise. Obviously, most services, the regulatory services, are working as normally as they possibly can, particularly our environmental health colleagues. You will know Refuse is doing double collection this week, and thank you to a number of members and residents that have thanked us for our communication in trying to let people know. We know we can't cover everybody in the borough, but we've certainly tried as hard as we can, and the guys are working particularly hard out there now, collecting double, and hopefully by Friday they'll be back to single. So I'm sure they've enjoyed a couple of days off. Most things are as they were last reported at the last committee. Just to let you know, we have applied for a second tranche of funding to support the theatre from the Arts Council, and we are still awaiting the outcome of our application for the Leisure Recovery Fund for our leisure contracts. Our parks still remain to be quite busy, and we're constantly keeping those monitored. And certainly, having had my dog weighed today, it's 3 kilos lighter. So clearly, doing quite well. And just to let members know, the place was a lateral flow test site, and that is closing on Friday as the numbers are exceptionally low going to there. So there'll be one central point, but we're hoping to hear shortly around testing for workers that are working in multiple factories or shops. So we're hoping that that coincides, but effectively the flow test centre will be closing at the end of this week. So that's the update really on the COVID response.
Mr. Chairman, did you say I could speak because you're on mute? Thank you. Mr. Brace, on the parks,
yep.
I've been going to Lake Meadows, not as often now because it's very busy. I'm a bit concerned at the play area, and certainly the traffic near the foot flow near the gates seems to be very heavy. And I didn't know whether we could put more signs or potentially be doing our own assessment on how many children should be on certain play equipment, because it seemed very, very busy and congested.
The sign, we've not removed the signage because there was signage at each play area saying how many would be allowed in there and on each piece of equipment. Well, we have introduced marshals now to circulate around the parks, particularly the larger ones, so Lake Meadows included. So thank you for your comments, Councillor. I know Hugh will pick that up because he's leading that to ensure there's marshals there.
Just so that I'm sorry, I was just about to finish, that on a lot of the equipment or the apparatus, there were multiple children on them, and I just thought that looks very, very busy.
Yeah,
I thought I'd just raise it as you just mentioned it.
Yeah, we've had many issues in certain areas, so yeah, we'll get the marshals to visit that probably on a more frequent basis to try and help us out, as well as our own staff that are in the park when they're cleaning. So, thank you for that, Councillor.
Okay, that's that report. Now, the next item is the exclusion of the public and press. But before I do that, the recommendations to go to the item on Pitsea Swimming Pool, which is the item 15, and the recommendations are on the public part of the agenda. Executive summary. The reason it's in part 2, the rest of the report, are because of the financial details within that report. I'm quite happy to leave this in part 1 if members can restrain themselves from mentioning the recommendations are quite clear. Let me be quite clear. Pitsea Swimming Pool is going to be built. It's going to be built within the next 12 months. We're on the road to doing it. The problem has been COVID has caused some delays in the way we can go through the tendering process. We're now getting back on course, and the recommendations tonight will get us back on course and get Pitsea Swimming Pool built. So if members can be trusted not to refer to the finances within the green paper, part 2, I'm happy to take the discussion in part 1.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I don't think it's about trust. It's just asking people to agree. I agree to that as a position for myself. So I would prefer to keep in part 1 and only go into part 2 if absolutely necessary. And I think it is right for the public to hear us if need be.
I agree. So if people, I'm happy to deal with it in part 1. The executive part is there. I'm looking at officers now because I don't want to commit a cardinal sin.
No, that's fine.
The report is there. And let's be honest. The recommendations are quite clear. To authorise the Director of Community and Environment in consultation with the Director of Resources to procure technical services up to REBA Stage 3 from preparation to develop design associated with provision of a modular build swimming pool in Pitsea to be funded from the 2021-2022 capital programme for swimming pool strategy in the borough. Award the contract for the appointment of an architect to progress design work up to REBA Stage 3 in line with the Council's contract procedure rules. Appoint an employer's agent to act as a project manager and cost consultant to ensure value for money and review budgets at all stages of the project. And then a further report be presented to this committee to provide details of the findings up to REBA Stage 3 in order that the committee can assess the viability of progressing the project to tender stage for the construction phase. I see that coming back, hopefully, fairly quickly. I think the recommendations are clear. I would normally bring members of the committee in first, but I'm not. I'm going to bring Councillor Rimmer because.
Can I ask for a point of clarification?
Pardon?
Can I ask for a point of clarification?
Yes.
Just first, I don't want to debate it. You said that we would have it built within 12 months, but it looks like you're asking in the recommendations for funding next year. How are we funding it if it's going to be built in 12 months if we're using money the following year? So I'm just getting a bit confused on the timeline.
Mr. Bryce.
That the capital money is in the budget, so it carries over. It's in the budget this year, so it will carry over to the next financial year anyway. It will move over automatically from this year to next year.
Yeah, the chairman said it will be built within 12 months. Is that the plan within the budget?
Well, the budget is there for next year.
It's there for next year.
It's there for next year.
Yeah, so it will be within the next 12 months built and paid for in the 12 months that we've got the budget for.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. I can't guarantee it, but I'm not putting people off. And people say someone's going to come and say you didn't do it on X amount of time. You know, you sound like you would produce somebody who didn't have a vaccine on February the 15th. You know.
Pardon? No, what I'm trying to just understand is that if the budget's where the money's coming from to build it, if it's going to start happening now, it's out of this year.
It's in the budget.
The money's in the budget. It's in the capital programme.
Good. All right, that's what I was clarifying.
It will carry forward.
Okay.
It would take a decision of full council to remove that capital funding from the budget.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
I'm going to ask Councillor Rimmer has sat there quietly. He's not a member of the committee, but he asked to attend tonight as a Pitsea councillor. I'm going to ask him to come in first. It's unusual, but I think it's fair because he sat there and some other members have offered to come to committee to speak on an item and often interjected on many other items. He hasn't tonight, so I praise him for that. He's probably been off and had a drink somewhere instead. Craig.
I haven't, I promise, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to speak tonight on this item. It is one I'm very passionate about, and I probably will ask to speak anytime it comes up at this committee, just to let you know, because I know how much my residents in Pitsea South East actually will welcome the establishment of a pool at the Eversley Centre, making it a centre of sporting excellence. It already is a place that creates a sort of feeder club for the Olympic gymnastics movement that we already have established, and it's got the 4G football pitches as well. But to the credit of Councillor Ferguson, I know he came along to, and Councillor Dadds, who opened it as well, when we actually opened the gymnastics and 4G pitches. I'm going to hold the director with his new promotion of community environment to his promises that he made at this committee meeting, but I will be able to swing off my.
It's just a title.
Okay. No extra money with that. You should negotiate better next time, Paul. And I will hold him to his promises about me being able to swim off extra kilos from my extra indulging Christmas I'm going to have when I can meet up with all of my family, and in January 2022. I look forward to that and I think my residents do. I've heard from many of the residents, but actually it's not just going to be a place for young people in terms of training them to swim and for the first time. There's a place of community. It's a place of actually helping them with any sort of physical impairment they have as well, and keeping fit as well for more elderly members of the community. And this could be such a sustainable model. We've seen it work in Whitford, as the chairman would know, this swim gym model. And I think this will make it a more sustainable swimming pool for Pitsea, having this swim gym model at the Eversley Centre. I have a little niggles and little concerns that we are actually looking at a feasibility study again, but I'm putting my trust in the officers. But this is a technicality, a hurdle that we're trying to overcome. And I am going to take the chairman at his word on this. And I look forward, when we have a new administration in May, that a Conservative administration and its mayor and myself will be able to cut the ribbon on this swimming pool in 2022. And I promise you, we'll all be invited for a swim there when it actually occurs. But this is key, because now what we have learned more than ever through this pandemic, that actually we have to create a mental well-being resilience amongst our residents, for sure. And part of that is a physical well-being. And part of actually making them resilient to these sort of black swan events is having that physical resilience as well. So health and fitness is more crucial than ever before. And probably this swimming pool and what it could create could be more life-affirming than ever before. It's so crucial for all levels, for all ages. And I just commend it to this committee, and I'm glad that it is progressing and dealing with whatever knotty issues that come about.
Thank you, Councillor Rimmer. I'm going to bring Councillor Ferguson next, had his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We started this evening's meeting with the Youth Zone on the agenda, and tonight we finish it with Pitsea Swimming Pool on the agenda. Two exciting projects that will make a massive difference to the lives of our residents. And just want to echo your comments at the start that we are absolutely committed to bringing a swimming pool to Pitsea. A swimming pool is absolutely vital for the residents. We've just heard from Councillor Rimmer there the health benefits and the mental health benefits to residents, and it's true. It's the benefits that this will bring is absolutely vital, and we're absolutely determined to bring a place for Pitsea residents to come to enjoy, to spend time, to be with friends and family, and most importantly, a place that they can be proud of. And I look forward to that happening. And this is a vital step that we're taking tonight to make sure that happens.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. I've now got Councillor Blake, Councillor Dadds, and Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, fully support this, and totally go along with what Councillor Rimmer said and what Councillor Ferguson said. To be honest with you, very good speeches. I will say though, and listening to what you said about your enthusiasm for there to be one in a year and a bit, whatever. I'm not going to hold you to that. But I did have one concern, and I understand it's just the way I assume officers have to word things. But I had a little bit of concern about recommendation 2 with the word which connects to the viability of the progress in the project. I had a little bit of concern about that, and I've been satisfied by yourself and by officers that it's jargon that has to be used, but it just want to noted that wasn't initially anyone, and the reason why I raise it, whilst I was happy, I think it's important that anybody listening into this who has any issue with that it's clarified that it really is just the jargon that's used. So it's just for clarification.
I'll bring Mr. Brace in now on that point.
Yeah, obviously we've already had one failed procurement process, and what we, Grant and the team have been working on with legal and procurement and all Uncle Tom Cobley and all including finance is to make sure that we're going to go through this process which de-risks the project for the failures that we had prior. So we will have to, and the right and proper thing to do is to bring back members to this committee once we've gone through that process, effectively a viability of the project. So it will set out the costs, it will set out, you know, timeline, and it will also set out operational costs, and then it will be for members to decide the next step, i.e. we do it. So this is yes, it is wording, but ultimately we have to be open and transparent as officers. You have to see the numbers, and then you will make the decision on that. It is not for us, as I've said previously on many other projects, like Wickford Pool, as mentioned tonight. You know, we read the map, and there was a gas main that was supposed to be going round the building, and it wasn't where it was supposed to be, and went straight through the middle of the site. Cost us rather a lot of money to move it, but this particular project, we're hoping we can cover all that stuff off, so members are fully aware of what we're going into, which will more than likely give us a more successful process and getting someone that actually can provide us with a compliant tender.
Thank you, Mr. Bryce. It was Councillor Dad's next, wasn't it? Yes.
No, I didn't ask to speak. That's fine.
No, it was Councillor Buckley then.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on the round of this article, yeah, I don't actually think that we even really need to separately discuss the Part 2 paper, because I think when we come to it, we can actually vote on the item that's in the public domain. I have, though, got a few points just to make. Councillor Blake in particular is aware that I do not hold architects in the highest esteem, and there is a reference in here to working designs up to RIBA stage 3, which I accept is something we need to do. So one question is, have we got any thoughts of a design guide, by which I mean for the appearance of the building? I'm sure our officers know what needs to go inside it. And in particular with the reference to the modular build, which sounds to me like one of the tin warehouses that you see in some of the industrial estates. And I see you nodding your head, Chairman, but I'd just like some clarity from officers on that. So perhaps we could have some explanation of what we really mean by modular build, what design guides you're going to give, because at the end of the day, it's in a prominent location, and we don't want something that's going to look an eyesore there. We want something complementary. And the last question, or actually last one question, recommendation 3 or 1-3 says about appointing an employer's agent to act as project manager. Yes, we need a project manager. There's no two ways about that. But when we say appoint an employer's agent to act as that job, who are we talking about? A member of staff, somebody external? Yeah, I don't know. And just the observation about Wickford and the gas main, because I do recall that that caused a few hiccups, which I know Mr. Brace is very well aware of. Things like gas mains and that are not always where they're shown on the maps that are held by the utility companies, and some of them are in places where even they don't know where they are till they start picking them up. I would hope that in this particular location there shouldn't be anywhere near it, but we're all aware of some of the services that run through Basildon Town Centre, for example. So that's just my points on that, Chairman, if officers could respond.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Buckley. On the modular building, yeah, you weren't on the committee when it first came to this committee. I think Councillor Rimmer probably did attend at the time when we had some photographs of a modular building which officers have visited, I think, didn't we not? And it was one where it was so futuristic in effect that repairs to the pool can be done from underneath rather than emptying a pool. And the design on that one I saw, I thought was absolutely good, really good. And that was only one particular design. And that was the principle of which we agreed to go ahead with the modular building at that time. So nothing has changed about going ahead with a modular building. Mr. Brace, on the other points.
Just to come back, the building can be matched to any of its surroundings. So although you get the shell effectively of the modular building, and then we can choose what goes with it to complement Eversley, whether it be brick, whether there's something else we want. So we'll be looking at various designs on that, but just to give you assurance, it is purpose built for it modular. But you can, the one that we showed was built many years after the leisure centre was built, and it was an additional pool put in, but it was matched perfectly to the building, so it won't look odd. It will look like it's supposed to be there.
So you won't use the C word on it. And sorry, I did miss one other thing. What's the life expectancy of this type of structure?
25 years.
Okay, fine.
And then we would look to replace it, which would be far cheaper than maintaining a pool, as we all know from Wickford. Very expensive.
Okay, the other points Councillor Buckley raised, Paul.
Employer's agent, it will be external. And of course, the employer's agent will also be checking and ensuring the costs are keeping within line, and materials are what the materials were supposed to be. We do place a lot of trust on these people building stuff for us, but ultimately we want someone checking to make sure it's right, because we do want it to last for the 25 years, Councillor.
Okay, so if everyone's happy, I don't intend to go in. Oh, Councillor Reid, sorry, I didn't see your top left-hand corner now.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, just to say that I agree with Councillors Rimmer, Councillors Bacon and Councillor Ferguson that the people of Pitsea desperately do need a swimming pool again. And I would hope that if the administration doesn't change, that in May that we would invite you, Councillor Rimmer, to the opening. And I think with Pitsea's new swimming pool and with the youth zone in Basildon, it's very exciting times for young and old. And on that note, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. I think the recommendations are quite clear. I don't intend to go into part 2 to discuss anything further, unless anyone has an absolute desire to do that, because I think what we've spoken about, the recommendations, clarity is there. We can consider it on that basis, because you've had the executive report, the questions have been answered. I think everybody is behind having a swimming pool back in Pitsea. I praise Councillor Rimmer for his support for this, especially as he's not one of those who actually did vote previously to take a swimming pool away from Pitsea. So he hasn't got any historic baggage on his back. Okay, we'll take the votes. I've read them out once. One and two. That's 1, little 1, little 2, and little 3, and 2 on page 64 of the agenda. If you can unmute yourselves, we'll vote on that, and then we'll no need to go into part 2. Okay, are we unmuted? Councillor Blake.
In favour.
Councillor Reid.
No.
In favour.
Councillor Dance.
Yes, in favour.
Councillor Ferguson.
In favour.
Councillor Buckley.
In favour, I think you called me, Chairman. You favour.
I'm in favour, so it's unanimous. So thank you very much. That's the end of the meeting. Thank you for a very constructive meeting after a difficult start. Much appreciated, and I thank Councillor Rimmer for his attendance and all your support. So thanks very much indeed. See you back here on the 10th of March, hopefully.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Unless Councillor Dadds knows different and I have to go back to what I said at the